Chapter 732. As the snow fell, the few of them stood like statues beside the lake of despair. They stood there quietly for a long time. Everyone felt unbearable pain in their hearts. They had unified the three heavens here. They had fulfilled the wishes of the various clans here. Chu Yang had been planning and guiding all of this ever since he came to the three heavens. He had stirred up a storm and changed the situation of the three heavens. He came to the three heavens empty-handed. In a year, the world had been turned upside down. But after he succeeded, he disappeared without a trace. He left all the fruits of his victory to his brothers. How could the few of them not feel as if their hearts were being cut by a knife? After a long time. Let's go. Gu Duxing suddenly turned around and strode out. 2 drops of tears fell onto the ground at the same time as he turned around. The few of them turned around at the same time and walked down the mountain. Everyone walked slower and slower. Finally, when they were about to reach the bottom of the mountain, they all stopped in their tracks. They looked back. How they hoped that Chu Yang could jump out and appear in front of everyone at this moment. But even when everyone's eyes were sore, there was still nothing. The wind slowly grew stronger. Snowflakes flew everywhere and made sounds on everyone's bodies. But the few of them stood there quietly and looked at the lake of despair that was covered in snowflakes. They didn't even blink. After a long time, Gu Duxing let out a long roar and flew up like a shooting star. He became one with his sword in midair and disappeared into the wind and snow in a flash. Only his long roar became louder and louder as he went further and further away. It resonated through the clouds and didn't stop for a long time. Emotanji waved his sleeves and went down the mountain without saying a word. Ao Shiyun and Xie Danqiong stood side by side and looked at each other for a long time. Finally, they sighed deeply and went down the mountain together. GMO, Luo Kudi and Huyan Aobua stood at the entrance of the mountain. After a long time, GMO suddenly shouted with all his might, "Boss, we'll wait for you to come back." As soon as the words left his mouth, the cold wind flowed back into his mouth and turned into a whimper. The three of them stood there for a long time. Then a gust of wind and snow swept over and covered their figures. Not long after Emotianji and the rest went down the mountain. With 2 whooshing sounds, 2 figures appeared as if they were riding on clouds. They silently flew into the heavenly sword mountain from outer space. The 2 of them were like 2 illusions. They stood on the 2 stone tablets on the lake of despair, one on the left and the other on the right. Their eyes turned, and their spiritual senses instantly covered the entire sky sword peak. Nothing unusual, one of them said in a low voice. If there is no abnormality, then there is an abnormality, another person said coldly. That word should be calamity phenomenon. The first person said, could it be that one of the calamities is under this lake? Very likely. The 2 of them looked at each other. Suddenly, they waved their sleeves at the same time. With a whoosh, all the hot spring water in the lake of death surged up at the same time. It split into 2 halves and flew into the air. It was as if 2 walls of water had suddenly appeared in midair. Each of them was tens of thousands of feet tall and hundreds of feet wide. The lake of despair instantly dried up. There was not a single drop of water left. The flat ground below was exposed, and there was nothing there. The 2 of them had actually dried up the entire lake of despair with a wave of their hands. What kind of heaven-shaking, earth-shattering divine technique was this? The 2 of them looked at the same time and saw a small pile of fine powder on the same spot. It is indeed the Calamity Sword Master, one of them said. But this Calamity Sword Master is obviously different. The other person's voice was still cold. The first person thought for a while and laughed. He is indeed different. The other person's eyes flashed and said, this is the first one, right? The first person seemed to think for a while and said, starting from the sword, this is the 8th one, right? Oh, we haven't returned for 10,000 years. This is the first one. It's about time. The first person smiled faintly and said, very soon we will have an opponent. The other person laughed softly and said, I'm looking forward to it. The 2 of them turned and looked at the bottom of the lake at the same time. It was an extremely secluded place. At the bottom, there was a narrow passageway that emitted a faint, eerie fog. It seems like this entrance is still fine. It's enough to support us. One of them sniffed and said, "Yes, a large number of heroes have died here in the past few days. That's how it is." The other person snorted and said, "As long as the entrance doesn't collapse, it's a good thing." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. They exerted strength in their feet and injected their divine senses into the stone statues beneath them. Then, they retracted their hands, and the two water walls in midair fell with a whoosh. They were so huge and heavy, but once they fell into the lake of despair, they didn't make a single sound. The lake water instantly filled up, and there were no ripples. The two of them laughed and leaped up. They floated through the clouds, as if they weren't affected by gravity at all. They flew out just like that. From afar, one of them laughed softly. "The first Calamity Sword Master. Hee. I'm looking forward to it." The voice disappeared. The 3 days finally came to an end. After losing Chu Yang's brothers seemed to have suddenly grown up and matured. The 3 days entered a period of unification. The Mo clan, Ao clan, Xie clan, Gu clan, Dong clan, Ji clan and Luo clan completely took over the territories that originally belonged to the Meng clan, Tiang clan, O clan, Zhao clan, Li clan, Tu clan, Black Devil clan, and so on. These few clans cooperated sincerely and started to rule the three heavens with an iron fist. The master of abacus and calculation, Mo Tianji, held great power in his hands. He cleaned up the entire three heavens. Other than the dark bamboo, all the other powers were wiped out. Those who didn't submit were quickly wiped out by the few clans. 3 days after the chaos of the Jianghu, the world had entered a relatively peaceful era. At the same time, an organization called the Heavenly Ping Pavilion rose rapidly. Its members were very famous. The Solitary Sword Emperor Gu Duxing, the Master of Abacus and Calculation, Mo Tianji, the Evil Duke, Ao Xieyin, the Viburnum Flower, Xie Danqiong, the Lonely Swordsman GMO, the Wolf Lord, Luo Kadi. These few people seemed to advance together. They dominated the three heavens and laughed proudly in the martial world. The Heavenly Armament Pavilion's heavenly armament orders were everywhere. They were famous and unparalleled for a time. The Heavenly Armament Pavilion's strength was growing stronger by the day. It was developing at a speed that had never been seen before in the history of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion. The few pavilion masters of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion rarely smiled. Every one of them seemed to be cast from the same mold. They were cold and unapproachable. Only, when someone broke through the bottleneck of his cultivation, at the peak of the Heavenly Sword Peak, there would be one or a few people standing in front of the Lake of Death for a long time. Or, there would be a few people who didn't know fatigue and jumped into the Lake of Death with a huge boulder. Then they would use all their strength to dive down. Although they had never succeeded, if someone calculated, they would realize that the frequency of this happening was very high. Almost every once in a while, someone would appear there. And the person who appeared must have broken through. Moreover, the depth of their dive was also increasing with each dive. The upper three heavens. The upper three heavens was a mysterious world. It was completely different from the three heavens and the lower three heavens. The lower three heavens was a place where the empires fought for hegemony. It could be said that it was a vast land with abundant resources. Although the population of the upper three heavens was smaller, it was definitely not smaller than the lower three heavens in terms of size. The upper three heavens was 3 times the size of the lower three heavens, and the upper three heavens combined. The lower three heavens was filled with schemes and wits. The upper three heavens was filled with iron and blood. However, in the upper three heavens, if there was only wits and no martial strength, one would definitely not be at the peak. If there was only martial strength and no wits, it would be even more difficult to advance. At the peak there was a huge ruling clan. Other than that, there were many other big powers. Each clan had their own territory. Various big sects were like bamboo shoots after the rain. Strange people were not rare. At the peak, there were people who oversaw everything. This was a place with rules, organic chlorine, a foundation, traditions, culture, and laws. This was a place with rules and regulations. It was like a place that combined all the characteristics of the lower three heavens and the upper three heavens. It was like adding oil and sauce to form a separate continent. There were only things that one could not imagine. Nothing did not exist. This was a colorful world. In the upper three heavens, there was a clear standard of good and evil. There was a clear code of conduct. Filial piety was the most important of all virtues. In the upper three heavens, the flat mountain ridge. Although this place was called the flat mountain ridge, and seemed to be just a mountain ridge, it was actually a huge human gathering area. Just the flat mountain ridge included countless valleys, mountains, plains, and hills. The number of people living there was also hundreds of thousands of people. And the Chu clan was one of the three big clans that dominated the flat mountain ridge. The Chu clan was not a super clan, nor was it one of the big dominant clans. However, the Chu clan's strength was also extremely powerful. The elder ancestor was in charge of the clan. There were countless experts in the clan. The four brothers of the Chu clan's direct bloodline were all dragons among men. Their cultivation was not ordinary. They were known as the four heroes of the Chu clan, the heroes of the flat mountain ridge. The four brothers' cultivation was superb, and their wits were outstanding. After the eldest brother, Chu Failing, married the youngest sister of the Yang clan from the Aspen Valley, the reputation of the Chu clan was even more powerful. However, the good times did not last long. In less than 2 years, the eldest brother of the Chu clan, Chu Failing, suddenly met with an accident. He was chased and fled with his wife, who had just given birth. After the chase, although the couple was lucky enough to escape, they lost their newborn child. From then on, Chu Failing was almost unable to recover from the setback. He rarely went out, as if he was defeated by this tragic blow. The new leader of the Chu clan became the second brother of the Chu clan, Chu Failong. Chu Failong was both skillful and intelligent. In a short period of time, he actually made the Chu clan, which had suffered a setback, rise again. This made everyone look at him in a different light. On this day, a horse carriage rushed into the gate of the Chu clan at lightning speed. Chu Failing, who had not appeared in front of others for a long time, actually drove the carriage himself. On his face, there was both excitement and worry. It seemed that he was very anxious. When he reached the gate of the Chu clan, he did not stop and directly rushed in. Suddenly, the Chu clan was in chaos. After a while, there was a piece of news. The eldest grandson of the Chu clan, who had been missing for 10 years, was actually found. Today, he returned to the clan. Chapter 733. In the study room of the Chu clan, the current clan master, Old Master Chu Xiongcheng, was putting a map back to its original position. He sighed, "Flat Mountain Ridge is so big. How can it be united? Moreover, each of the three big clans is doing their own thing. Isn't this a joke? If the Chu clan forcefully conquers, the consequences will be unimaginable. It's not just two big clans." Old Master Chu sighed. His broken eyebrows were almost squeezed together. To Chu Xiongcheng, he was already satisfied that the Chu clan had been guarding the flat mountain ridge for generations. The Chu clan had grown stronger and stronger. Moreover, his descendants were all working hard now. It wouldn't be difficult for them to achieve great things in the future. As the clan master of the older generation, Chu Xiongcheng was already very satisfied. As for the annexation of Flat Mountain Ridge, the Chu clan would be the only big clan, and complete the mission of the big clans. Chu Xiongcheng didn't even think about it. Since the world is stable, why should we kill each other when the Three Stars Divine clan is still thriving? Everyone just wants to protect themselves and develop steadily. It's fine. Of course, Old Master Chu definitely didn't know that his eldest grandson had returned to the Chu clan. This king of hell Chu overturned the entire lower three heavens and changed dynasties. With a wave of his hands, the lower three heavens changed. In just 2 years, he had overturned 2 planes. Such scheming martial arts could be said to be unparalleled in the world. If Chu Xiongcheng knew about this, he wouldn't care about the Chu clan's current problems. The problem was, he didn't know. Just as he was sighing, he suddenly heard a commotion from afar. It seemed like someone was shouting, yelling and running around. The entire Chu clan was like a pot of boiling water. Old Master Chu frowned. He pushed open the window and shouted, "What's the matter? It's a mess. Why is there a ghost in broad daylight?" Old Master Chu was born in the pugilistic world. Although he had studied for a few days, He still felt that there were too many twists and turns in the minds of scholars. Therefore he looked down on them. A guard was scared out of his wits and threw him over. Clan Master is back. So what if he's back? What's so great about that? Chu Xiongqing said angrily. Are you all hoping that he won't come back? What's so shocking? This old man thought you had seen a ghost. No. It's... The guard was sweating profusely. The problem is that you didn't come back alone. He came back with young mistress? Chu Xiongqing's broken eyebrows twitched, and he almost wanted to jump out of the window. Bastard. If he doesn't come back with your young mistress, is he going to find a mistress? Does he have the guts to do that when he sees his wife? The guard's face was full of black lines. Did he bring back the young master who had been missing for 10 years? What do you mean missing for 10 years? Chu Xiongqing only said half a sentence. Suddenly, he widened his eyes and gasped for breath. You, brat. What did you say? Suddenly, he jumped out of the window and grabbed the guard's neck. Say it again. Yes, the eldest young master, who has been missing for 10 years, has been found. The guard's expression was very pitiful, and his voice sounded like a chicken being slaughtered. His neck was choked, and his feet were off the ground. Fuck. Why didn't you say so earlier? Chu Xiongqing said angrily. At the boss's place? I'll go take a look. Just as the guard nodded, old Master Chu had already disappeared. The guard fell to the ground and coughed a few times with his hands on his throat. Finally, he rolled his eyes and got up. I still wanted to get some reward, but I didn't expect to be beaten up, damn it. While he was muttering to himself, a white glowing object suddenly flew back and hit him on the back of his head. He was immediately knocked to the ground, and a visible bump appeared on his head. Old Master Chu's voice came from afar. I'll reward you with a piece of white crystal, ha ha ha. The guard touched his unicorn-like head and wanted to cry. I'd rather you didn't reward me. The Chu clan was in an uproar. The so-called direct bloodline. What was the direct bloodline? According to the rules of the clan, it was passed down to the elder, and not the younger generation. The eldest grandson was the true direct bloodline in the traditional sense of the clan. Other than that, there was nothing else. Chu Xiongqing's eldest grandson was Chu Feiling. Chu Feiling's eldest grandson he only had one son. In other words, the true direct bloodline of the Chu clan was only this one. Of course, if Chu Feilong or other brothers took over, it would be a different story. Chu Xiongqing had been worried about this. If the eldest grandson didn't take over, and the second grandson took over, this would be a sign of chaos in the clan. Now, when he heard that his eldest grandson had suddenly returned, how could old Master Chu not be excited? Chu Feiling's small courtyard was already full of people. Everyone in the Chu clan was gathering here. The fourth son of the Chu clan, Chu Fian, landed. His eyes were brimming with tears. Damn it, I've been searching for 18 years. Now I've finally come to an end. In the future I'll be free. He rushed in like a gust of wind. Big brother, I heard that you found the little brat? Once he entered, he was shocked by the heavy atmosphere in the room. Chu Feiling raised his head with bloodshot eyes. Yes, I found him, Sai. He sighed. Unexpectedly, there was unspeakable sorrow in his voice. What happened? Chu Fian was stunned. He's injured and unconscious. Chu Feiling rubbed his temples. Chu Fian was dumbfounded. He naturally knew what Chu Feiling meant by unconscious. If even Chu Feiling had such an expression, then the Chu clan might not be able to do anything. If there was a little hope, Chu Feiling wouldn't be so sad. Where is he? Where's my grandson? Old Master Chu Xiongqing suddenly appeared with a loud roar. Inside! Chu Fian stretched out his hand. Before Chu Feiling could stop him, Old Master Chu had already rushed in. Waha, little brat, why aren't you kowtowing? Grandpa has a big gift. Chu Xiongqing was in high spirits. All these years, he had suffered a lot from his in-laws, but he couldn't refute them. Now that he heard that someone from the Yang clan was here, Old Master Chu immediately ran away, regardless of whether it was an elder or a young one. Now that his grandson was back, it meant that all his worries were gone. However, before he could finish his sentence, his words were suddenly stuck in his throat. Well, what's going on? Old Master Chu stood in front of the bed in a daze. Half of Yang Ruolan's body was on the bed, and she held her son in her arms. She raised her head reluctantly and smiled. Father-in-law is here. What's wrong? Chu Xiongqing looked at the young man on the bed and stretched his neck. Injured unconscious. Yang Ruolan sighed softly. It's already the next day. This. Old Master Chu suddenly trembled. Don't tell me. Halfway through his sentence, he almost wanted to slap himself. If there's hope to save him, why would my daughter-in-law act like this? He couldn't help but sigh. He glanced sideways and saw a dazzling purple light. Isn't this the purple crystal jade essence? In the unconscious son's palm, a ray of purple light shone out. In his palm, there was a piece of purple crystal. Chu Xiongqing's heart trembled. He gently took son's hand and wanted to take out the purple crystal to take a look. However, although Chu Yang was unconscious, his hand was tightly clenched, and he couldn't take it out. If he wanted to take it out, he would have to break all 5 of his fingers. He seems to know that this is the only hope for him to acknowledge his ancestors and return to the clan. He actually refuses to let go. Yang Ruolan's tears flowed down. My poor child. Ah! Chu Xiongqing sighed. He stood rooted to the ground and stared blankly for a while. Then he walked out. I'll ask the elder if there's any way. If there's really no way, I'll personally make a trip to the Medicine Valley. Yang Ruolan's eyes brightened and she said, Thank you, eunuch. Chu Xiongqing sighed. What are you thanking me for? He's your son, but isn't he my eldest grandson? Don't tell me that I feel better in my heart. At this moment, a clear voice was heard from outside. Big brother, congratulations. I heard that my eldest nephew has finally been found. Haha, this is a joyous occasion for our clan. It was the second son of the Chu clan, Chu Feilong. Chu Feilong's voice was filled with gratification and blessings from the bottom of his heart. He seemed to have finally heaved a sigh of relief. The heavens have taken pity on us. My eldest nephew has been gone for 18 years. Now we're finally reunited. The Chu clan finally has a successor. Sister-in-law, you can finally rest assured. This is really worth celebrating. When Chu Feilong arrived, the 100 or so people in front of Chu Feiling's door suddenly dispersed. Their gazes were evasive, and their footsteps were light. It was as if they had seen a monster. Chu Feiling and Chu Feiyin, who were inside, both frowned. In the inner chamber, Yang Ruolan also frowned. She seemed to be about to flare up, but she only sighed in the end. Chu Xiongqing's face turned black. Everyone could tell that Chu Feilong's words were from the bottom of his heart. It was as if he was giving his blessings wholeheartedly. However, his words were too hurtful. The Chu clan finally has a successor. Sister-in-law, you can finally rest assured. This sentence had a profound meaning. Chu Feiling had a son, and Chu Feilong had more than one. Since when did the Chu clan not have a successor? Even the third brother, Chu Feihan, had a daughter. As for the next sentence, sister-in-law, you can finally rest assured. It was as if Yang Ruolan and Chu Feiling were determined to take over the position of the eldest grandson. Chu Feiyan's face changed slightly. He raised his head and looked at his eldest brother and second brother. Suddenly, he felt a surge of undercurrents. He thought, what's wrong? Second brother seems a little abnormal today. Second brother, thank you for your concern. Chu Feiling smiled faintly and said, this sentence also had a double meaning. Chu Feilong smiled gently and said worriedly, but I wonder how my eldest nephew is now. Eldest brother, can I go in and take a look? Chu Feiling stepped aside. Second brother, please go ahead. We're brothers from the same mother. As his second uncle, it's natural for you to take a look at your nephew. After all, we haven't seen each other for 18.5 years. Chapter 734. Chu Feilong laughed and stepped into the room. He said, Sister-in-law, Feilong is here to visit. Before entering the inner room, he had to inform her first. After all, Big Brother's inner room was sister-in-law's territory. Come in. Chu Xiongqing shouted angrily. Chu Feilong was stunned. He didn't expect his father to be here first. He even made a face at Chu Feiling and Chu Feiyan. He complained softly. The two of you are really something. You know that old master is here, but you still let me take the thunder. After he finished speaking, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. Chu Feiling sighed in his heart. Chu Feiyan's doubts were swept away. He laughed and said, "Second brother is really unlucky this time." Chu Feiling snorted. When Chu Feilong entered the inner room, he saw two pairs of eyes staring at him. He couldn't help but shrink his neck. He laughed awkwardly. "Father, sister-in-law. You bastard." Chu Xiongqing was furious, but he couldn't vent his anger. After all, it was fine if you understood Chu Feilong's words as a form of concern. However, if you misunderstood it, it was fine. Especially as the clan master, he couldn't say such things casually. Once he made a mistake, it would be too late for him to cry. "This is my nephew, right?" Chu Feilong took a step forward and looked at Chu Yang, who was on the bed. He took a light breath and said, "You're indeed a talent. Sigh, it's a pity. Father, do you have any good ideas?" Chu Xiongqing said angrily, "If I had any ideas, would I still be sitting here like this? Are you fucking slapping my face?" Chu Feilong smiled apologetically. "I don't know how to speak." Chu Xiongqing snorted. Suddenly, Chu Feilong thought for a while and said, "Sister-in-law, I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it." Yang Ruolin stroked her nephew's hair and said lightly, "Say it." Chu Feilong smiled embarrassedly and said, "Sister-in-law, this nephew, I don't know if you've verified it before. Cough cough, I don't mean anything else. It's just that our Chu clan is big, and it's inevitable that there will be imposters. Cough cough. I'm just saying it casually." However, his words immediately made Chu Xiongqing raise his guard. Only then did the old man remember that he had been too happy to ask this important question. If he mistook Feng Jing for Ma Liang and brought someone else's child home, making a fool of himself was a small matter. But would the Chu family's foundation fall into someone else's hands? After taking a closer look, Chu Xiongqing said suspiciously, "Second brother, I think this child isn't fake. Look, he looks so much like your eldest brother when he was in his teens." Chu Feilong smiled bitterly. "Father, looks alike. Every child that the Chu clan has brought back in the past 18 years looks like Big Brother when he was young. The most important thing is the verification of the bloodline." "Father, I remember that there is a way." "Not bad." Chu Xiongqing immediately said, "I remember that old Yang told me about a method called blood of the tongue, purple crystal hum? This can't be faked." Chu Feilong clapped his hands and said excitedly, "Isn't this the purple crystal? Let's give it a try. Won't the truth be out then?" Yang Ruolan's face turned as cold as ice. She said slowly, "Eunuch and second brother, are you saying that we should take out this piece of purple crystal jade essence now, and then take the blood of this child's tongue to verify his identity?" Chu Feilong said sincerely, "Sister-in-law, I know that this matter is really difficult for you. Everyone has sons and daughters. A child is like a piece of flesh that has fallen from the mother's body. How can we not feel heartache? Not to mention taking the blood of the tongue. Even if it's just a little bit of flesh, as a parent, our hearts will feel as if it's being cut by a knife." He paused for a while and continued earnestly, "But now, we have to verify my nephew's identity. You have to know, from a young age, no matter whether it's the figure or appearance, there are many changes. Who knows what a child will look like when he grows up? But no matter what, the bloodline can't be changed." Chu Feilong took a deep breath, and his expression suddenly became solemn. "If sister-in-law trusts me, I'll do this personally. I'll naturally reduce my nephew's pain to the minimum. I'm sure of this." Chu Feilong's words were sincere, and his voice was filled with emotion. His voice and his sincerity moved Chu Xiongqing. He stroked his beard and said, "These words make sense. I don't agree." Yang Ruolan said sternly, "The child is unconscious now. How can he bear such pain? Furthermore, he's holding the purple crystal jade essence tightly in his hand. We can't take it out at all. If we want to take it out by force, we'll have to break his fingers. How can we do that?" She said indignantly, "The child values the purple crystal jade essence so much. Isn't this enough to prove it? Moreover, a mother's heart is linked. When I saw him, I knew that he was my son. Don't tell me this is also a lie." Chu Xiongqing stroked his beard and muttered, "These words make sense." Chu Feilong smiled calmly and said, "Sister-in-law, you're overthinking. And your words are too serious. How dare Feilong question his sister-in-law? But, sister-in-law, if you put yourself in my shoes, You've lost your child for 18.5 years. It's such a long time. How can you say that a child is your son when you see him? He smiled bitterly and said. Then you insist on the family's agreement. Ha ha ha. Isn't this a little too childish? He paused for a moment before continuing. Besides, extracting the blood from the tip of the tongue isn't a big deal at all. It's just a simple prick of the needle, and it's done before anyone even realizes it. As for his finger, Chu Feilong frowned and said in an arrogant voice, how can a man not bleed in this chaotic world? Who doesn't get hurt? For a few pieces of purple crystals and white crystals, they can even turn the world upside down and leave corpses everywhere. What's more, this is an important matter for the heir of a big family. It's just 5 fingers, but they can prove his bloodline. Even if they're broken, so what? Moreover, Luang's injury isn't unrecoverable. The Chu family has many miraculous medicines. As long as it's proven that he's my eldest nephew, we'll not only treat his injuries, but also provide him with all our resources for his cultivation. We'll hope that he'll achieve something soon and bring glory to our ancestors. But if it's proven that he's not of our Chu family's bloodline, then what's the point of losing his 5 fingers? He laughed coldly. Not only his 5 fingers, even the rest of his bones will be broken and interrogated. Who came up with such an idea to destroy our Chu family's bloodline so effortlessly? Chu Feiling and Chu Feiyan had already quietly entered the room and were listening to these words. It had to be said that Chu Feilong's words were reasonable. From the big and small points, strengths and weaknesses, as well as the distance and near, they were all considered. It was impeccable. Chu Fian recognized Chu Yang, but at this moment Chu Feilong, Yang Ruolan and Chu Xiongcheng were all covered up and couldn't see them. When he heard Chu Feilong's words, he couldn't help but agree. Second brother's words make sense. Chu Feiling suddenly turned his head and glared at him angrily. Yang Ruolan laughed coldly and said resolutely, no matter what you say, I won't agree. This is my son. I'll fight with whoever dares to touch him. Old Master Chu Xiongcheng frowned and persuaded. Ruolan, look at this matter. Since you're so confident, we're only going to verify his identity. Don't tell me that we don't even have the right to verify the identity of our Chu family's grandson? Yang Ruolan said blankly. We need to verify his identity, but not now. If we don't want to verify his identity now, we'll have to break my son's 5 fingers. I won't allow that. If we really want to verify his identity, then we'll have to wait until my son wakes up. Chu Feilong's eyes flashed and he said, what if he doesn't wake up? Then we'll wait. Yang Ruolan said resolutely. We'll wait until he wakes up. Ha ha ha. Sister-in-law, what's your intention for delaying time like this? Chu Feilong took a breath and said solemnly, time is the most precious thing. 2 hours can destroy a clan. 3 days and 3 nights is enough to change a dynasty. He sighed softly. Sister-in-law, if we continue to delay, who knows where the crisis will be? Upon hearing this, Chu Xiongqing and Chu Fian were both shocked and moved. Although the Chu clan was one of the 3 superpowers in the flat mountain ridge, the 3 superpowers were in turmoil now for unknown reasons. They heard that it was because of the Tribulation Sword Master, and that the higher-ups had made arrangements. The next step for the flat mountain ridge was to unify. At such a time, the 3 superpowers were willing to do anything. And Chu Feiling had found his son at such a critical juncture? How could there be such a coincidence in the world? Chu Feike's face was solemn and worried, but he was laughing coldly in his heart. Yang Rulan already had 1 foot in her trap. After he received the news, he didn't make any moves on the surface, but secretly started to investigate. He soon found out that Chu Yang was holding onto the purple crystal jade essence tightly. So when he came personally and saw Chu Yang holding onto the purple crystal jade essence, he was even more determined. In fact, when he saw Chu Yang, who looked almost the same as his elder brother when he was young, he had already confirmed that this was true. But he couldn't admit it. Not only could he not admit it, but this was also an important time to attack Chu Feiling. Once he missed this opportunity, he might regret it for life. As long as Yang Ruolan left the Chu clan with her son, Chu Feiling's father-in-law, who was a powerful helper, would be half destroyed. So he insisted on verifying the identity of his son. He understood what a loving mother meant. Her son, who had been missing for 18 years, had returned to her side and was unconscious. Which mother would be so cruel as to break her son's 5 fingers to verify his identity at such a time? She would rather die than do that. So as long as you don't agree, I have my ways. What I'm afraid of is that you're willing, Yang Ruolan said coldly and resolutely. No matter what, whoever dares to touch my son will have to step over my dead body first. Chu Feiling's body shook and he said hoarsely, Ruolan. Yang Ruolan tilted her head and stubbornly ignored him. Chu Feilong shook his head and sighed. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he whispered, Sister-in-law, this matter can't be arranged by the Yang clan. Chapter 735. The King of Hell wakes up. Yang Ruolan squinted her eyes. What do you mean? Chu Feilong sighed and said, This is a matter that concerns the future of our Chu clan. Sister-in-law, why do you insist on stopping us? He suddenly said with grief and indignation, Sister-in-law, what are your intentions? You insist that this is your son. We want to verify his identity and ensure the purity of his bloodline. But you're obstructing us again. You're even threatening us with your life just to verify his identity. Chu Feilong shook his head and sighed. His face was solemn. I really don't want to suspect you, sister-in-law. Chu Xiongcheng and Chu Feiyin lowered their heads as they heard this. Chu Feilong's words were reasonable and logical. Everyone couldn't help but think too much about it. In the eyes of men, even if they had to lose an arm to prove their innocence, they wouldn't hesitate to do so. What's more, it's just 5 fingers. In the Jianghu, who hadn't paid a price that was more serious than these 5 fingers. For the Chu clan to be able to stand in the upper 3 heavens. How many people had died, let alone 5 fingers? But they didn't realize how cruel it was to break the fingers of a mother who owed 18 years of debt to her son in front of her. Chu Feilong made use of the iron-blooded indifference of the people in the martial world and the feelings of a mother who was full of guilt. He knew that even if Yang Ruolan died, she wouldn't allow anyone to touch a single strand of her son's hair. That's why he provoked her so unscrupulously. Moreover, he was acting like a loyal and righteous person, justifying his coercion. Chu Feilong, you're too much. Chu Feiling stepped forward and said angrily, How dare you speak to your sister-in-law like this? I'm sorry, big brother. Chu Feilong's face was solemn and helpless. Please believe me. I don't want to suspect my sister-in-law more than anyone else. But you're still suspicious. Chu Feiling said angrily. You don't believe your sister-in-law, but do you believe my words? I've said that this is my son. My only son. He's the descendant whom the Chu clan owes 18 years of debt. Is that enough? Not enough. Chu Feilong straightened his back and said frankly, Big brother, it's not that I don't trust you. It's just that I'm more convinced that the blood of the tip of the tongue and the hum of the amethyst, that is the bloodline that has been recognized since birth. His eyes were filled with guilt as he said, Big brother, I know that you and sister-in-law can't bear to part with her, but how can this kind of thing be taken lightly? Love is long, but the heroic spirit is short. If there's really such a scheme, then it's a small matter for our Chu clan to become a laughingstock. It's a huge matter if we end up giving away all the blood and sweat that our ancestors have sacrificed for us. As he said till here, Chu Feilong's face was full of pain. He suddenly stood up and took 2 steps back. He tidied his clothes and knelt down. He said with a sorrowful face, Big brother, please be ruthless for the sake of our Chu clan. Sister-in-law, even if I'm being unreasonable today, please, show me the evidence. For the sake of the Chu clan, for the sake of the clan, for the sake of Sun Wandai, and for the sake of the blood of our ancestors. Chu Feilong knelt down. His tears actually dripped down, but he didn't even blink. He shouted painfully, Big brother, sister-in-law, please grant me my wish. Everyone was shocked when Chu Feilong knelt down. Old Master Chu Xiongcheng looked at his second son with a complicated expression. There were some tears in his eyes, but there was also a trace of relief. A man should have gold under his knees. If he wasn't forced to the extreme, how could Chu Feilong, the current head of the Chu clan, be so compromising and kneel on the ground? It could be seen that Chu Feilong was loyal to his clan. He valued the inheritance of his bloodline even more. For the Chu clan to have such a grandson, it was enough to comfort their ancestors. Chu Feiyin stood by one side. This upright fourth son of the Chu clan was also deeply moved by Chu Feilong at this moment. He couldn't help but say, "Big brother." Chu Feiling gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. He was well aware of Chu Feilong's intentions. He had always known that his second brother was cunning and sly, but he really didn't expect Chu Feilong to be able to do things to such an extent. In front of Chu Xiongcheng, Chu Feiyin and Chu Feilong, Chu Feiling didn't have any way out. There was no way out. Chu Feilong. How are you? You're so vicious. Chu Feiling almost vomited blood. Chu Feilong knelt down. His face was full of loyalty. He looked straight into Chu Feiling's eyes and said sorrowfully, "Big brother, if you don't agree, I will kneel here until I die." His voice was fierce and resolute. Chu Xiongcheng sighed. "Feiling, your second brother has already knelt down in front of you. What else do you want? Don't tell me, you really want him to die?" Chu Feiling suddenly turned back and looked at his father with grief and indignation. He said sorrowfully, "Father, don't say any more. Let me ask you, your second brother, didn't he do it for our Chu clan? For our clan? Isn't it for you? What else do you want?" Chu Xiongcheng shouted. Chu Feiling trembled. "Father, this poor child has been abandoned by us for 18 years. 18 years?" He screamed. "For 18 years we didn't do anything for him. How did he grow up? It's really tough. Now that he's finally returned to the clan, he's going to cut off his fingers." He screamed. "Father, how can you bear to do this? He's your grandson." Chu Xiongcheng sighed and his eyes became wet. Chu Feilong knelt on the ground and said resolutely, "Big brother, it's too early to say the words grandson. Before we verify his identity, who can be sure that he's my grandson?" He raised his head and said loudly, "Of course, if we verify his identity, he's indeed the descendant of our Chu clan. Then we'll compensate him in the future. We'll get whatever we want. But if not, our Chu clan can't afford to lose face like this, and can't bear such a loss. Big brother, can you stop being so muddle-headed? Brother, I'm begging you. Shut up," Chu Feiling said angrily. "Chu Feilong, don't think that the tricks you've played all these years." He was furious, and was about to say everything. "Enough." Yang Ruolan suddenly interrupted him. She looked at Chu Feilong, Chu Feiyin, and Chu Xiongcheng. After that, she looked away and looked at her son lovingly. Her gaze was extremely gentle and resolute. She knew that although the two of them knew that Chu Feilong was the one who did all those things, they didn't have any evidence at all. If Chu Feiling said it now, he would definitely be blamed by Chu Feilong. In that case, once a conflict broke out, Chu Feilong's fingers would definitely be cut off with Chu Xiongcheng present. She took a deep breath, and her voice calmed down. "I just want to ask the Chu family, is it necessary to carry out the bloodline test today?" The Chu clan. Yang Ruolan had already proven her determination by saying these words. For her son, she would rather not be a member of the Chu clan. "Of course. Absolutely. Sister-in-law, please fulfill my wish," Chu Feilong said sternly. He had waited so long for this moment. How could he give up this opportunity just because of Yang Ruolan's words? Naturally, he blocked her way out. "All right." Yang Ruolan smiled gently. She said calmly, "Since the Chu clan can't tolerate my son, I'll take him away. Aren't you afraid that my son is fake? As long as I take him away, it won't matter if he's real or fake, right?" "Leave. Where are you going?" Chu Feiling was shocked. "Ruolan, don't be rash." Yang Ruolan shook her head calmly. "I'm not rash. I'm leaving here to return to the Yang clan." She lowered her head and looked at her son's face. She said slowly, "You won't let him take the surname Chu, but I can let him take the surname Yang." Chu Feilong heaved a sigh of relief secretly and said, "Sister-in-law, why do you have to do this for such a simple matter?" At this moment, a voice suddenly said, "Yes, why do you have to do this for such a simple matter?" Everyone heard Chu Feilong's words. Naturally, they knew that he was the one who said this. However, the second voice was unfamiliar to everyone. This voice was very calm and indifferent. Furthermore, it was filled with disdain and arrogance. The voice was clear, but every word was enunciated clearly. Furthermore, this voice was filled with weakness. He seemed to be out of breath, which made people who heard him couldn't help but worry that he wouldn't have the strength to continue after saying the first word. However, he said every word clearly. Although he was weak, he said it in one breath. The only strange thing was that no one had heard this voice before. Everyone was stunned. Even Yang Ruolan and Chu Feiling were stunned. An instant later, everyone turned their heads at the same time and looked at the unconscious youth on the bed. He had already opened his eyes. He didn't seem to have any strength, but his eyes were as clear as autumn water. Everyone was dumbstruck. Chu Yang. Everyone argued for a long time. They all had the same thought. This fellow won't wake up. But at this moment, this little one had unexpectedly woken up. Chu Feiling and Yang Ruolan were overjoyed when he woke up. However, Chu Feilong, who was kneeling on the ground, seemed to have lost his mind. This was such a heaven-sent opportunity. At the last moment, this fellow's words caused such a huge change. Their efforts were all for naught. Chu Yang raised his hand with difficulty. The purple crystal jade essence in his palm landed on the bed. He tried his best to smile and said weakly, "Since then, it's only right to verify my identity, otherwise, I would be too embarrassed to stay here." Everyone was stunned. They didn't expect this fellow to be so reasonable when he woke up. His body was as weak as cotton. Chu Yang coughed a few times and said weakly, "As a brother of the Chu clan, how can I not verify my identity?" A cold light flashed in his eyes, but because his head was lowered, no one saw it. He coughed a few times and said weakly, "This, second uncle, I don't know if your sons have all been tested?" Chapter 736. Chu Yang had been walking on a tightrope. A huge amount of heaven and earth origin energy surged out from the sword guard. An endless amount of divine spirit energy attacked his mind from the soul of the first tribulation sword master that he had devoured. This huge amount of divine spirit energy pushed Chu Yang to the brink of collapse thousands of times in these few days. It was as if he was walking on a tightrope at the speed of a turtle on a cliff covered with ice and snow. Furthermore, the tightrope was slippery because of the ice and snow. If he wasn't careful, he would be smashed into pieces. He didn't even know how long he had been unconscious for, until there was a period of time when he felt as if he was in a warm embrace. It was a kind of happiness that was close to a baby's death. He was surrounded by his mother's aura. It was the warmth of a dream that he had yearned for 2 lifetimes. This feeling made him relax a lot. From then on, his progress gradually stabilized, until today, he suddenly felt that the warm aura suddenly became violent and angry, as if it was filled with pain. This feeling made the unconscious Chu Yang wake up a little. Although it wasn't the best time for Chu Yang to wake up, he almost forced himself to wake up. When he woke up and regained some consciousness, Chu Yang felt that his eyelids were as heavy as a mountain. He felt weak all over, as if he was paralyzed. His body seemed to be floating in the water, but also seemed to be floating in the sky. He couldn't calm down for a long time. There were only vague yet clear words that drilled into his ears, one sentence after another, sentence after sentence, clear yet ethereal, as if he was talking in a dream. After a long time, Chu Yang finally understood. Could it be that he had returned to the Chu clan? Well, what was going on? He didn't have time to think about anything. He only heard people talking more and more fiercely. The matter had already reached the point of no return. Feeling his mother's sadness and anger, Chu Yang opened his eyes recklessly. "This, second uncle, I don't know if your sons have all been tested?" Chu Yang's words were earth-shattering. "Me? What do I need to test?" Chu Feilong was stunned. He subconsciously said, "My children aren't lost." Chu Yang smiled weakly. He forced himself to be alert and quickly changed the topic. "It's just that. I don't know what are the conditions for testing. How can I do that?" Chu Xiongqing looked at the weak young man who was lying on the bed. His gaze was complicated, filled with love and calmness. After a long while he said, "The key is the purple crystal jade essence in your hands." He sighed deeply. Back then, Ruolan's father obtained the purple crystal jade essence. He split it into 2 pieces and asked a friend to help him make 2 jade pendants. One of the pieces was made by using your own blood from the tip of your tongue to break into the jade essence to form the word Chu. If it's really you, I'll extract a drop of blood from the tip of your tongue and pour it into the purple crystal jade essence. When it overlaps with the Chu character, it will naturally fuse, and the Chu character will turn golden. That is to verify his identity. Chu Xiongqing said slowly. Father is right. That's exactly the case. Chu Feilong nodded his head and looked at Chu Yang. He said kindly, Young man, you must know that the purity of the clan's bloodline is related to the inheritance of the clan. Don't harbor any resentment. I am very cooperative. Chu Yang said weakly. I'm more eager than anyone to acknowledge my ancestors and have a family. I've been longing for 10 years. Hearing this, Yang Ruolan's eyes were filled with tears again. She almost wanted to hug her son tightly and kiss him to her heart's content. This purple crystal jade essence should be something that everyone in the Chu clan can use, right? Chu Yang coughed and said, Because, after all, it contains the blood of a descendant of the Chu clan. As long as you're from the Chu clan, you should be able to use it, and there shouldn't be any conflicts. Theoretically, that's the case. Chu Xiongqing touched his beard and faintly felt that Chu Yang's words had other intentions, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Chu Yang couldn't possibly want to stir up any trouble right after he returned, right? Chu Yang panted weakly and said hurriedly, Then what are you waiting for? Isn't it just a drop of blood? Let's start quickly. I can't wait. Chu Feilong twitched his mouth in disdain. This country bumpkin seems to have been leaping for a long time. No wonder he's so impatient. Ever since Chu Yang opened his mouth, the fourth son of the Chu clan, Chu Feiyan was stunned. Others really hadn't heard this voice before. But Chu Feiyan had heard it more than once. It's really this little one. Chu Feiyan wanted to groan out loud. The king of hell whose name shook the lower three heavens. Chu Feiyan's face became distorted. If others knew that he had already found him more than a year ago, but didn't have any concrete evidence and didn't bring him back, he had actually dragged on for more than a year. If father, sister-in-law, and elder brother knew, he would definitely not be able to keep his skin and flesh. It would be a miracle if he wasn't skinned alive. Furthermore, if the elder knew that he had done such a thing, he would probably be punished even more severely. He might even be punished to face the wall for decades. That wouldn't be strange at all. The entire clan was looking forward to it. You've already found him. Yet you still dragged on for more than a year and a half. What kind of a bastard was this? Therefore, Chu Feiyan lowered his head and shrank to one side the moment Chu Yang opened his mouth. He thought to himself, if there's really light, then how can I erase this matter? It seems that the root of the problem is still this little one. Under everyone's gaze, Yang Ruolan used her trembling hand to hold a thin needle and gently pricked the tip of Chu Yang's tongue. A drop of red blood seeped out. Chu Xiongqing waved his hand, and that drop of blood flew out from the tip of Chu Yang's tongue and landed on the purple crystal jade essence. Immediately after, Old Master Chu suddenly let out a heh sound. His entire body was covered in white light. He had already activated his divine technique to control this drop of blood and imprinted it on the Chu character between the purple crystal jade essence. He originally thought that this would require a lot of strength. However, he didn't expect that the drop of blood would seep in almost instantaneously before he could exert any strength. In the next moment, the drop of blood seemed to have its own consciousness as it climbed onto the Chu word. Then, without any warning, the Chu word suddenly shone brightly and turned into a bright golden color. Around the Chu character on the jade essence, a ring of purple light soared, appearing extremely majestic. Then, a line of small words suddenly appeared in this circle of light. Everyone looked at it. Blood on the tip of the tongue, soul of the purple crystal, the bloodline of the Chu clan, confirmed. The heavenly precision technique is unquestionable. These 24 words were as thin as a strand of hair, but the strokes were clear. They naturally carried a sense of arrogance. It's him. It's definitely him. In the inner chamber, everyone exclaimed in surprise, including Chu Feilong. His expression now seemed to be that of surprise from the bottom of his heart. Child, it's been hard on you. Chu Xiongcheng cried, and hugged Chu Yang in his arms. Chu Yang hissed and exhaled. Gently, gently, my bones are about to break. His entire body was weak now, just like cotton. After being hugged by Old Master Chu, his bones were almost fractured. Old Master Chu then realized, oh. He hurriedly let go of him. Although they were already prepared, Chu Feiling and Yang Ruolan were still shocked by this huge surprise. In that instant, they felt that their hearts were beating like drums and almost jumped out of their throats. The two of them stood there in a daze. For a moment they couldn't even move. My son. It's really my son. Now there was no longer any doubt. Even Chu Feilong didn't have any reason now. Congratulations, elder sister-in-law. Congratulations, elder brother. Chu Feilong and Chu Feiyin congratulated at the same time. Their voices were sincere. But which one was sincere and which one was fake? It was worth pondering over. The entire room seemed to be filled with a jubilant atmosphere. The hostility from before seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Chu Feilong naturally hoped that this matter would pass just like this. He was very depressed now. He had painstakingly built up everything. But it was all gone just like that. How depressed was he? As for Chu Xiongcheng, Old Master naturally didn't want any more twists and turns. After all, they were all from the same clan, and they were all his sons. Old Master didn't want to see any unhappiness. Yang Ruolan and Chu Feiling only wanted to chase them away at this moment. Son, I haven't hugged you properly yet. This was a good time to talk. However, some people didn't want this matter to pass just like that. My identity has been verified? Chu Yang panted weakly, and there was a sense of grief and indignation in his voice. Good boy, it's been verified. It's been verified. You're my good grandson. I'll be the first to tear apart anyone who dares to say otherwise. Chu Xiongcheng hurriedly assured and comforted him. His old eyes were still a little red. Poor child. He is so loyal, honest, polite, and sensible. That's great. Then I'm the Chu clan's eldest grandson? Chu Yang's voice was weak, but he persisted in asking. It was as if he would faint after asking this question. Of course. Old Master Chu Xiongcheng gave the final word. That's great. If that's the case, then call the daughters of second uncle, third uncle, fourth uncle, and so on. Let's test them. Chu Yang let out a long sigh of relief and said in a comforting manner. He said it very briskly, as if he was saying, Aya, after holding it in for so long, I can finally take a piss. It feels so good. Come and take a piss too. It was so normal, however, everyone was stunned. Test. Why? Old Master Chu was a little dizzy. Grandfather, I'm thinking for the clan. Our Chu clan's bloodline must be pure. For the thousands of years of blood and life of our ancestors. For the purity of our descendants for thousands of years. Chu Yang's voice was so weak that it seemed as if he was about to stop breathing. However, his voice was full of righteousness. His loyal and devoted heart could illuminate the sun and the moon. He said resolutely and decisively. For the clan, for the inheritance we must test it. This, Old Master Chu was in a difficult position. There's no need for that, right? Chu Feilong smiled and said, Nephew, my family's situation is different from yours. Your brothers have never gone missing. Chapter 737. Chu Yang's face was full of loyalty and honesty. He even looked a little silly as he said this. His heart was filled with hatred. Damn it, why would I care about your second uncle? You're obviously up to no good. How dare you bully my mother like this? Damn it, if I don't play with you today, I'd rather not be surnamed Chu. I'll follow my mother's surname Yang. From today onwards, I'll be called Yang. Minister Chu was furious. But on the surface, he looked honest and loyal, with an innocent face. However, the moment Chu Yang's words left his mouth, everyone in the room was startled. Old Master Chu Xiongcheng opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Finally, he closed his mouth and shook his head. Damn it, I was still praising him just now. I felt that this grandson of mine was very sensible and loyal. I didn't expect him to detonate a bomb with his next sentence. Furthermore, this bomb wasn't an ordinary one. He's really a troublemaker. On the first day he acknowledged his ancestors, he had already offended all three of his uncles. Chu Feiling's face turned black, and he turned his head away. Yang Ruolan's face was calm, and her heart was comforted. You dare to bully me? I have a son to stand up for me. Chu Feilong, let's see what you're going to do this time. It's so satisfying. You wanted to break my son's finger just now, but my son made you a cuckold the moment he opened his eyes. You're really quick to repay your debt. Awesome. Chu Feilong's square and dignified face instantly turned purple. No matter how well-mannered he was, he couldn't tolerate such words. This was the greatest humiliation for a man. He said angrily, Big nephew, what do you mean by this? Chu Yang put on an honest smile and said in a sincere tone, as if he wanted to dig out his own heart. Second uncle. Although this nephew has just entered the clan today, but just now, second uncle was full of righteousness for the clan, and your words and actions were full of loyalty and righteousness. I admire you very much. From that moment on, I've already vowed to learn from you and follow your example. I'll wholeheartedly work for the clan, even if we have to climb a mountain of swords, plunge into a sea of fire, and jump into a pot of boiling oil. We must bring glory to our Chu clan and maintain the purity of our bloodline. He weakly took a few deep breaths before he continued to speak from the bottom of his heart. Second uncle, you see, although I just entered the family today, my father is the family head, and I am naturally the eldest grandson. How heavy is the responsibility on my shoulders? Now that the heavenly layer is surging, people's hearts are unfathomable, and schemes are emerging endlessly. My Chu clan isn't one of the top ruling clans, right? Their position is rather unstable. Everyone wants to annex them, right? What kind of dire situation is this? Chu Yang heaved a long sigh. Such a heavy burden is about to fall on my shoulders. Poor little nephew, how can I bear it? That will require second uncle's assistance. Minister Chu's words were sincere and sincere. His words were full of affection and good intentions. However, everyone had mixed feelings in their hearts. Judging from the way this guy spoke, it seemed like he already considered himself to be the future clan head. He actually said, a heavy burden, small shoulders. Did he say that he wanted you to be the clan head? He actually said, second uncle, you have to assist me. What the heck? After Minister Chu finished speaking, he even added, second uncle, don't you think so? Without waiting for Chu Feilong to reply, Chu Yang had already smoothly continued. Second uncle, of course, has no objections. Anyone with a discerning eye will know that I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart for the good of the clan. Chu Feilong had just opened his mouth, but Chu Yang had already finished speaking. He couldn't help but stare. In front of his father and brother, how could he have the face to argue with his eldest nephew? He could only swallow a mouthful of saliva. Since my position is so important, my responsibility is so heavy. Chu Yang was full of responsibility. He said resolutely, how can I not give it my all? How can I not do it for the sake of the clan? How can I not ensure the purity of the clan's bloodline? Fortunately, this is a heaven-sent opportunity. With the purple crystal jade essence, and the bloodline of the Chu clan in it, we'll know whether it's pure or not after a test. Chu Yang chuckled and said with great success, besides, this isn't a troublesome matter. I just need to call my brothers and sisters over and prick them lightly. Everything will be fine. Furthermore, I don't need to break my fingers. I've already pricked them just now. It doesn't hurt at all. From his tone, it seemed that he was very proud of this idea that he had thought of. You've indeed pricked them, but what's your situation? Why should others prick them for no reason? Besides, how is this a simple prick? This is simply a humiliation. A complete humiliation. This matter isn't just a matter of bloodline. It's directly related to the survival of the clan. Chu Yang said sincerely, I know that this matter has offended second uncle, third uncle and fourth uncle. But, seeing that I'm wholeheartedly doing this for the clan, I believe that the few of you won't blame me. Second uncle, why don't you call your brothers over for a test? Everyone will be at ease, right? After going around in circles, Chu Yang had directly raised this matter to the height that Chu Feilong had mentioned just now. In fact, it was even higher than that. Furthermore, all these methods were used by Chu Feilong just now. Now, Minister Chu was using the same method. He was giving Chu Feilong a taste of his own medicine. Furthermore, he made Chu Feilong speechless. Chu Fei Yen was sweating profusely at the back. This fellow is a schemer in the lower three heavens. Diwu Qingrou's huge empire was ruined by him in a year's time. At this moment, second brother, you've really met a troublesome person. It's only the first day, and he's already in such a mess. Furthermore, he's still lying down and unable to get up. If I wait for him to stand up energetically, damn it, luckily I didn't offend him. The one who offended him was second brother. Nonsense. I've never lost my son. What's there to test? There's no need to test. Chu Fei Long angrily rebuked. What accident happened there? Chu Yang was displeased. Second uncle, you're wrong. When did I say that there was an accident? Everyone was exasperated. When did you say that? You kept saying that there was an accident. Furthermore, just because you've never lost your son doesn't mean that he's your son. What if? It's a clan scandal. Let's not talk about it. It's more important to verify his identity. Minister Chu sighed with emotion. Of course, with second uncle's character and charisma, I definitely trust you. However, no matter how good your character is, it's not as good as solid evidence. The most important evidence of our Chu clan's bloodline is the blood of the tongue and the soul of the purple crystal. It's just a small prick. Second uncle, why are you stopping me? Don't tell me, you have ulterior motives? Chu Yang's eyes turned cold. Second uncle, you're stubbornly stopping our Chu clan from verifying his identity. What are you up to? Chu Fei Long was so angry that his whole body started to tremble. These words were exactly what he had said to Yang Ruolan just now. He had almost driven Yang Ruolan crazy just now. Now that these words were being said to him, Chu Fei Long finally knew what it felt like to be wronged for no reason. His limbs were cold, and his chest was about to explode. Chu Yang sighed and said, Second uncle, it's true. Although my brothers aren't lost. But what if? Second uncle, it's a small matter for us to raise someone else's son. However, the Chu clan's legacy and the efforts of our ancestors. How can we? It's really hard to say this. As a junior, I'm embarrassed to say this. Old Master Chu Xiongqing's face turned black. You've even said that you're raising someone else's son, and you're still embarrassed to say it? Chu Feiling felt that his son was a little too much. No matter what, I'm still your second uncle before you fall out with him. But you're being accused of being a cuckold. It's a little inappropriate. Therefore, he wanted to stop Chu Yang. But Yang Ruolan grabbed him and rolled her eyes. Yang Ruolan was feeling very comfortable after hearing this. She felt that she had never felt so good ever since she was a young lady in her maiden home. Chu Yang's words were better than thousands of horses and thousands of soldiers. Seeing that Chu Feiling wanted to stop Chu Yang, Yang Ruolan was furious. You bastard, you brainless fool. Can't you see that he's standing up for us? I'm feeling very gratified. Why are you stopping me? Evil creatures. No matter how scheming Chu Feilong was, he was still angered by Chu Yang. He couldn't help but roar. Second uncle, you're right. Those with unknown origins are evil creatures. Chu Yang said in agreement. We have to verify their identities. We can't let those evil creatures of unknown origins exist in our Chu clan. Alright, it was just your brothers. But now it's a bunch of evil creatures of unknown origins. Old Master Chu Xiongqing was sitting at one side, and had already fainted. Although Old Master Chu had some tricks up his sleeves, he was still a pure warrior in his bones. Everything was direct and efficient. This was his strength. But if he were to be involved in such a conspiracy, it would be better to just cut off his head. Now his eldest grandson and second son were at loggerheads. Old Master Chu couldn't say anything. He couldn't even leave in a huff. He was in a dilemma. You mean you suspect that your second aunt is unfaithful? Chu Feilong bent down and looked at Chu Yang dangerously. A junior saying that an elder is unfaithful. This was a taboo in any clan. Chu Feilong's question was somewhat sinister. When did I ever say such disgraceful words? Chu Yang cried out as if he had been wronged. You shouldn't accuse me like this. I'm only suspecting the origins of those bastards. When did I mention my second aunt? Second uncle, you're slandering me like this. I'm very sad. He paused and suddenly realized something. Second uncle. In order to avoid verifying their identities, you actually used my second aunt's reputation? How can you do this? No matter what, my second aunt has lived with you for so many years. I'm really embarrassed to say this. Chu Fei Long almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Just now, when he knelt down, Chu Fei Ling and Yang Ruolan had no way out. In less than an hour, Chu Yang had left him with no way out with just a few words. Furthermore, he was only making things difficult for Yang Ruolan. But now, what Chu Yang was doing was 10 times more humiliating than before. And he couldn't retaliate. Chapter 738. Chu Fei Long almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Chu Xiongcheng, Chu Fei Yan and Chu Fei Ling also almost spat out blood. Chu Xiongcheng sighed in his heart. The world is big and full of strange things. He's actually my grandson. And he's actually born in the Chu clan. The Chu clan has been loyal and upright for generations. This is really a donkey that came out of a flock of sheep. That mouth of his was like a knife. Chu Yang wasn't done yet. He said with a sad face, "It's fine if you've wronged me. But for you to say such things about my aunt, don't you feel guilty at all? Furthermore, what did I say? I didn't say anything." Sigh. Now I know what it means by, if you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. Everyone fainted when they heard this sentence. They had seen shameless people and troublesome people, but they had never seen such a troublesome person. You've said the most unpleasant words in the world, but you just said I didn't say anything. And I'm too embarrassed to say anything in the blink of an eye? Chu Fei Long's lips trembled, and his whole body shivered. His hands and feet were cold. For the first time, Chu Fei Long regretted what he did today. His intestines were green with regret. Why did I provoke him for no reason? Now, I'm trapped and can't get out of this situation. Regardless of whether the test was carried out or not, I've suffered a great loss today. If word got out that the children I've raised for more than 10 years needed to be tested to prove that they're my children, then, how can I continue to live in this world? But if I don't do the test, how can I get through today? You keep saying that you're raising someone else's children. Is that a good thing? Chu Fei Long held his breath and asked word by word. Second uncle, you're being unreasonable. King of Helchu's words almost made Yang Ruolan laugh out loud. Who's the one being unreasonable? I'm saying if, Chu Yang said with conviction. If. Second uncle, if. He looked very sad and indignant. The whole family is here. No matter what, I'm still surnamed Chu. How can I say this? Everyone scolded in their hearts. You still know that you're surnamed Chu? Chu Fei Long is so scheming. You've already forced him to the point where he's about to commit suicide. What else do you want? Sure enough, Chu Yang said. In all my life, I've always left some leeway in everything I do. That way, we'll be on good terms in the future. Patience was like a knife above his head. No matter how angry he was, he would let go when he had to let go. If he could spare someone, he would spare them. But second uncle, you didn't give him any leeway, forcing me like this. So, he said with grief and indignation, how far do you want to push me before you stop? Everyone was dumbfounded. Look at how magnanimous you are. You even improvised a poem, like a saint. But, how thick-skinned did he have to be able to say something like this? How far are you going to push me before you're willing to stop? This sentence was definitely what Chu Fei Long was thinking right now. If someone else were to say this, Chu Fei Long would definitely hold on to that person's hand with tears in his eyes and say, "You're my soulmate." However, these words were actually spoken by Chu Yang, who was in the middle of forcing people to the point that it was too late for them to hang themselves. This was truly admirable. Ugh. Chu Fei Long finally couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then he covered his chest and started to pant heavily. He stared at Chu Yang and said word by word, "If I absolutely don't agree to the verification of my identity, what will you do?" Chu Yang twitched his mouth and said, "Isn't that simple? For the Chu clan, for the clan, for the blood of our ancestors not to be wasted, for the efforts of our ancestors not to be wasted, for our descendants to live on for generations to come. Ha ha ha. I'd rather kill 1,000 innocents than to let off a single one. Second uncle, don't forget. Our surname is Chu." Chu Yang's eyes were like lightning. Although he was lying on the bed, his cold and resolute killing intent made Chu Xiongcheng, who had experienced hundreds of battles, break out in cold sweat. "Kill. Chu Fei Long laughed coldly. You dare? I don't dare. Chu Yang's eyes became sharp. I'm the eldest grandson of the Chu clan. As long as I don't make any mistakes, this clan will be mine in the future. Second uncle, do you dare to make a bet with me? As long as you refuse to verify my identity today, I dare to eradicate them one by one in the future. He laughed sinisterly. Just like what you said when you bit off my finger to force my mother. This is for the Chu clan. For generations to come. I'm upright and have a clear conscience. The atmosphere in the room froze. Not to mention these few people now. Even if you're still strong, and have a few more children in the future, every one of them must be verified by the blood of the tongue, and the soul of the purple crystal. If I don't verify, I'll kill every single one of them. Chu Yang said slowly. I believe that the ancestors of the Chu clan will agree. Chu Fei Long only felt a wave of anger in his chest. Without thinking, he said angrily, let's see who kills who first. Chu Yang had been waiting for this sentence. He immediately turned his gaze and said, Grandpa, listen, this is also what second uncle said. So far, I'm the only one whose bloodline has been verified. That is to say, only I am your grandson. Second uncle, he actually wants to kill me for an outsider. Chu Yang said with endless grievances. He felt so wrong that he was about to cry. How could he not make use of such a great deity beside him? Chu Xiongcheng was confused and dizzy. Suddenly, he saw that the uncle and nephew, who had just acknowledged each other, were at daggers drawn, and talking about life and death. He was thinking in his heart, what's going on? How did they end up here while they were talking? Then he heard Chu Yang's words. He couldn't help but shout, how dare you? Chu Fei Long, what are you trying to do? Chu Fei Long's lips trembled, and his face turned purple. He stared fiercely at Chu Yang. Am I wrong? Chu Yang shouted angrily. Am I not doing this for the sake of the purity of the Chu clan's bloodline? Am I not doing this for your own good? Am I not doing this for Sun Wandai? Am I not doing this for the sake of the Chu clan? How am I wrong? Minister Chu said bitterly. How am I wrong? Second uncle, is this how you treat me? To put it bluntly, if one of your children belongs to someone else, how are you going to explain it? He said sorrowfully. You must know that there are many hats in this world. But there's a hat that has color. And it's like the grass in spring. Men don't like it, right? Second uncle, I'm doing this for your own good. Chu Fei Long shouted and spat out a mouthful of blood. His burly body was on the verge of collapsing. His square and dignified face was pale. He had never dreamt that he would be forced to such a state. Furthermore, his father was right in front of him. He couldn't do anything. So what if you spit out blood? I've been bullied and haven't spat out blood. Who are you putting on this act for? King of Hell Chu was already unforgiving. If you dare to treat the Chu clan's bloodline as a game, I'll ask my father to bring people to kill those who refuse to verify it. Grandfather is also here. I believe that he'll be able to distinguish between right and wrong. Stop talking, verify it. Old Master Chu Xiongcheng's face was also purple. No matter how stupid he was, he could tell at this moment. If they didn't test it, the Chu clan would probably be torn apart by the war today. Father. Chu Fei Long raised his head in shock and looked at his father. What are you shouting for? Chu Xiongcheng said angrily. Isn't this all planned by you? You're still shouting here. He roared. Call everyone here. I'll verify it myself. Chu Fei Long staggered back a few steps and fell onto the chair. Today, he had suffered a crushing defeat. Furthermore, the most aggrieved thing was that he had shot himself in the foot. Every time the other party retaliated, they used his own tactics. Every single one of his sharp words were exactly what he had just said. But when it was his turn, he felt 1,000 times worse. Because the other party had already verified his identity. It was perfectly justified. Grandfather, you're so wise. Chu Yang flattered loudly. He sneered in his heart. Go against me? Bully my mother? Humph. Second brother Chu. This matter won't end so easily. I'll settle the scores with you for the past 18 years sooner or later. With a command, a few youths came in. They were the younger generation of the Chu clan. Second brother Chu Fei Long's 3 sons, Chu Tinghu, Chu Tingjiao and Chu Tingyun. Third brother Chu Feian's 2 sons, Chu Tingxiao and Chu Tingkong. A fourth brother Chu Fei Yin still didn't have any descendants at this moment. These 5 youths were all aggrieved. Trouble would come from the sky if one had nothing to do. This saying was not false at all. They looked at Chu Yang, who was on the bed, and their gazes were as sharp as knives. Chu Yang was calm as usual. You little brats, Di Wuqingrou's army of 10 million has already been played to a pulp by me. What can you little brats do with a few glances? Yes, that square-faced and big-eared Chu Ting who looks the same as Chu Fei Long. He's the eldest and he's 18 years old? He's only 4 months younger than me. Chu Tingjiao, 17 years old, had a slanted face and looked very gloomy. Chu Tingyan, 15 years old, rolled his eyes back and forth. He's smart on the outside, but he's nothing to worry about. As for the 2 sons of his third uncle, the eldest one looked very loyal, while the second one was more lively. One was 17 years old, while the other was 13 years old. Chu Yang silently memorized the characteristics of these brothers. Minister Chu's photographic memory was not for nothing. As long as he wanted to remember someone, he could recognize him at a glance even if he only saw him once or after many years. As for the blood test, Chu Yang didn't want to do anything. He only did this to disgust Chu Fei Long, and to vent his anger for his mother. As for the rest, he really didn't think about it. Besides, even if Chu Yang wanted to do something to the restriction set up by Dukyu, he couldn't do anything now that the sword spirit was in a deep sleep. Not long after, the 5 youths finished the test. Although the jade pendant didn't emit a dazzling golden light like Chu Yang's, there was still a reflection. It was enough to show that they were the grandchildren of the Chu clan. Now it's clear. Chu Fei Long's chest heaved up and down as he shouted angrily. But there was no reply. Looking at Chu Yang, he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Chu Yang had already closed his eyes, and his breathing was shallow. He had actually fallen asleep again. Chu Fei Long punched the air with all his strength. This feeling was almost enough to make him vomit blood. Chu Fei Long snorted angrily and left. I've really embarrassed myself today. I'm afraid that tomorrow, my scandal will start to spread in the upper 3 heavens. The youths all followed him out. Chu Fei Yin wiped off his cold sweat, and also slipped out. I'd better stay away from this little ancestor for the time being. He's too scary. Nothing good will happen when I'm around him. I'm always on tenterhooks. Chu Xiongcheng sighed and didn't know what to say. At this moment, Chu Yang opened his eyes again. He happened to see Yang Ruolin and Chu Feiling looking at him with sparkling eyes. Their eyes were full of desire. He couldn't help but smile and said, "Big." "What big?" Chu Feiling was anxious and sweated profusely. He hurriedly stopped him. "I'm your father." Chapter 739. What are you talking about? Chu Feiling was anxious and sweated profusely. He quickly shouted, "I'm your father." Chu Yang was speechless when he heard this. Old Master Chu Xiongcheng was stunned and confused. He didn't expect Chu Feiling to have such a reaction when he finally found his son, who had been missing for 18 years. He stared and stuttered. "What's going on?" Yang Ruolin, who knew the inside story and knew why Chu Feiling had such a reaction, almost couldn't help but burst out laughing, even though she was in such a state of agitation and worry about personal gains and losses. Chu Feiling's face turned red and he was tongue-tied. What about you?" Old Master Chu shouted. "Your son has been missing for 18 years, and you're acting like this the moment he comes back. What's the meaning of this?" He turned to Chu Yang and said, "Don't be afraid, my dear grandson. Your father has such a bad temper. Grandpa will stand up for you." Chu Yang was surprised. After a long time he said softly and uncertainly, "This is really the Chu clan?" The 3 of them fainted when they heard this. Does this little ancestor think that this is a dream? They nodded. Of course. Chu Yang took a deep breath. "Then, you're really my grandfather? Your father and mother?" The 3 of them smiled and nodded with tears in their eyes. His words made the 3 of them feel very sad. Chu Yang closed his eyes and finally opened them. Pinch me. I can't move." He wanted to sit up, but he still didn't have the strength. Yang Ruolan finally burst into tears. "Child." She hugged him and burst into tears. Chu Yang felt his mother's tears slowly slide down and soak his chest. He felt a kind of indescribable bitterness in his heart. He muttered in a stupefied manner, So, I'm not dreaming. Feeling his mother's embrace, Chu Yang's eyes slowly became moist. A feeling of weakness slowly rose in him. At this moment, the king of Hell Chu, who had experienced 2 lifetimes, actually felt an impulse to cry out loud. This weakness had nothing to do with courage or anything else. It was a feeling that could only be felt in front of a loved one. He was like a child, stubborn and proud. In the face of the storm of the world, he faced it alone, frowned coldly, and shouldered everything. When they were hurt, bullied, and in pain, all they could do was grit their teeth and smile coldly. But when she faced her parents, she couldn't help but cry. Even if he was smiling just a moment ago, when he suddenly saw the person closest to him, this kind of weakness, and even grievance would suddenly surge up. Chu Yang quietly stayed in his mother's arms. He gritted his teeth and didn't want to cry. However, her eyes were sore, and her nose was sore. She couldn't help it, and 2 streams of tears slowly flowed out. Then, as if a floodgate had been opened, tears surged out. Chu Feiling and Chu Xiongqing had mixed feelings when they saw the mother and daughter hugging each other after being separated for 18 years. The 2 of them wanted to say a few words of consolation, but at the same time, they felt as if something was stuck in their throats. They couldn't speak, and it seemed as if they would burst into tears if they opened their mouths. After a long while, old Master Chu Xiongqing said in a hoarse voice, "Rulan, your child is back. Your crying is making your child feel bad. This is a joyous occasion, don't cry." Young Rulan raised her head and saw that her son's chest was soaked by her tears. She couldn't help but feel embarrassed. She wanted to turn around and wipe her eyes, but she couldn't bear to let her eyes leave her son. She could only wipe them with the back of her hand. "This is your grandfather." Chu Feiling coughed and said, "Chu Yang, come and greet him." Chu Xiongqing also looked at Chu Yang expectantly. He said excitedly, "He's called Chu Yang? His name has always been Chu Yang." "Yes." Chu Feiling nodded awkwardly. "Greetings, grandfather." Chu Yang lay on the bed and was also a little embarrassed. "I don't know why. I can't get up, and I don't have the strength. I hope grandfather won't be offended." "Why would I be offended?" Chu Xiongqing stroked his beard and smiled. "It's good that you're back. As for your body, I'll find the best doctor in the upper 3 heavens. You'll definitely recover. Don't worry." "Okay." Chu Yang responded softly. He looked at Chu Feiling. His lips moved for a long time, and even his face turned red. Chu Feiling looked at him nervously. He was afraid that this little bastard would call him Big Brother. If that happened, he would quickly dig a hole in the ground. "Father," Chu Yang finally called out softly. Chu Feiling's heart relaxed when he heard Chu Yang call out to his mother. He also felt as if a huge rock had been lifted off his chest. He smiled and said, "Good boy. That's your mother." Chu Yang's eyes turned and looked at Yang Rulan. Yang Rulan's body trembled. She looked at him nervously. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't dare to blink. She forced the corners of her mouth to curl up. She wanted to show a gentle smile, but the sour feeling in her heart made it a little distorted. The more she tried to calm down, the more she couldn't maintain the expression on her face. Chu Yang smiled gently. His eyes looked deeply at Yang Rulan's face. His lips moved, but he closed them again. He forced himself to control himself, but his lips were already flattened in the end. His handsome face was also twisted strangely. His heartbeat was like a drum. It was as if his heart was about to shoot out from his mouth. He had never dreamed that he would be so weak. He couldn't even say a word. After a long time, "Mother," Chu Yang finally called out. But his tone was different. His voice was thick, as if he was crying. "Yes." Yang Rulan had been waiting for a long time. She hurriedly agreed. Tears flowed out of her eyes. Her body trembled violently. "Good boy. My good boy. My good boy," she choked. After a long time she gasped for breath. She reached out and hugged her son. It was as if she wanted to rub her son into her body. She blinked desperately and gasped for breath. Finally, she said with a voice that sounded like crying and laughing, You finally came home." She cried and laughed without any manners. She hugged her son tightly. It was as if her son would disappear in the next moment. After a long time, Yang Rulan jumped up and grabbed Chu Feiling's hand. Failing. Failing, did you hear that? My son called me mother. My son called me mother. I've been waiting for this for 10 years. I've been waiting for 10 years. I finally heard it. My son is back. He's back. He's back. Chu Failing held her hand tightly and said emotionally, Yes, yes, my son is back. He's back. Thinking of the suffering and worry that the couple had suffered in the past 10 years, he couldn't help but tear up. His heart was filled with mixed feelings. Chu Xiongqing turned his head slightly. 2 streams of tears fell from his eyes. After a long while his emotional state started to weaken. Young Rulin was already sitting by the bed. Her fingers gently stroked her son's face and hair. Her face was full of satisfaction. Her eyes were still moist. She would sob from time to time, but she had already calmed down. Son, how have you been all these years? Young Rulin thought of Chu Yang's past that Wu Qianqian had told her. Her heart ached. All these years. Chu Yang smiled gently and said, All these years it's been very peaceful. I didn't encounter any big problems. I grew up with my master. He's a very good person. He took care of me in every possible way. I didn't suffer any grievances. Everything went according to my temper. All these years were peaceful. Peaceful? Young Rulin couldn't help but want to cry again. She hurriedly held it in. She knew that her son was saying this to lessen the guilt in her heart. But, isn't it a little ridiculous to say that you've been peaceful? How many perilous situations have you faced? How many times have you escaped? He had overturned the entire situation of the lower 3 heavens, with his insignificant cultivation level. How could the word dangerous be enough to describe this? How many dangers have you faced when you went deep into the enemy's hinterland, the capital of Great Zhao? How many dangers have you faced? You fled alone for 13,000 miles. You were hunted down by the entire nation. You were surrounded by a force that was thousands of times stronger than you. How tragic was that? Why didn't you say anything about this? The situation in the lower 3 heavens was turbulent. You led your brothers to battle at the Lake of Despair. That wasn't peaceful. You didn't say anything about it, because you wanted me to feel at ease. Young Rulin felt that she was choking. She looked at her son's smiling face, and tried hard to find traces of hardships on it. However, she was lost in her son's face. Good child. Young Rulin said dotingly. Father and mother couldn't take care of you personally. You're still so handsome. Chu Failing smiled and said, This won't change. You look like me. No matter where you grow up, you'll still be handsome. Shameless. Young Rulin smiled through her tears. She suddenly felt that something was missing. She asked, Where's father? Chu Failing said, He gave me his blessings to take care of you. He went to arrange for a doctor. He smiled and said, I saw him crying just now. He must be embarrassed in front of his daughter-in-law. He hurriedly left. He tried his best to make it sound humorous. Young Rulin and Chu Yang smiled at each other. They felt that the heavy and sorrowful atmosphere was gradually fading away. I thought you were the one who left first. You're the first deity to become sworn brothers with your own son. Young Rulin pouted and said mischievously. Now that there were only 3 of them left, Young Rulin naturally wouldn't give him any face. Haha. When he heard this, Chu Yang couldn't help but laugh. Young Rulin saw that her words had finally made her son happy. She couldn't help but smile. Her heart was filled with a sense of accomplishment. She felt as warm as when her son was just born. She hugged and rocked him in her arms to coax him not to cry. As she thought about it, she couldn't help but feel motherly love. The way she looked at her son also became gentler. She looked at him as if he was a rare treasure. No matter how she looked at him, she couldn't get enough of him. His eyebrows were handsome, his eyes were handsome, his face was perfect. Even the smell on his body was so fresh and pleasant. Chapter 740. Chu Yang said unjustly, I'm really being wronged. How would I dare to take advantage of you? You didn't give me any chance to explain. You forced me to kneel down before I agreed. Then, when I was about to stand up, you pressed my head down and smashed it on the ground. Stop. Stop talking. Chu Failing's face was full of black lines. How can you blame me for this? Chu Yang muttered. If I don't blame you, am I to blame? Chu Failing looked at him majestically, trying to establish the dignity of a father. Why don't you let grandfather be the judge? Chu Yang didn't back down. Don't judge? You're making a fool out of me. Chu Failing was finally discouraged. He had no choice but to raise the white flag. He admitted defeat. Ha ha ha. Young Rulin suddenly laughed. She was overjoyed. Then, the whole family chattered a lot at Chu Yang's bedside. This was especially so for young Rulin. She forced Chu Yang to recount everything that had happened since he was young. Chu Yang was helpless. He could only choose his words carefully, fearing that he would say something sensitive. He could see that his mother was emotionally fragile. Chu Failing rolled his eyes as he listened. Young Rulin was very persistent, especially when it came to dangerous and injured situations. Chu Yang was obviously unwilling to talk about it, or simply skipped over it. But young Rulin always wanted to get to the bottom of it. Then, she forced the truth out of Chu Yang's mouth bit by bit. Then she cried guiltily. Then, it was the same for the next matter. Chu Failing couldn't understand it at all. My pain isn't much less than yours. But, it's really inconceivable that you have to make your son speak and cry like this. Thinking, he suddenly thought of something and said, Chu Yang, now that you've acknowledged your ancestors and returned to the clan, look at your name. Is it according to the family genealogy? Family genealogy? Chu Yang was stunned. Yes, when it comes to your generation, it happens to be the Tung generation. Chu Failing said, our Chu clan's order of seniority is usually based on one character. I'm from the Fei generation. Heroes soar glory for 1,000 years. Working together honor the clan. Tung generation. Chu Yang frowned. What is this called? You just need to add one word, Chu Tingyang. Chu Failing said gently. Chu Tingyang? Chu Yang's face darkened. Must it be painful? I don't want pain anymore. Chu Failing frowned and wanted to scold him. Chu Yang rolled his eyes. I don't want to be in pain anymore. I've been in pain for 18 years. Young Ruolan's heart ached. She hastily said, then don't call him Tung. Just call him Chu Yang. Don't worry, Mom will help you. Mom, you are a good person. Chu Yang lay down contentedly. Chu Failing's face darkened. This is the ancestral rule. The rules of the ancestors are also set by people. Young Ruolan argued irrationally. In any case, Chu Yang is the best. Don't jump. Whoever wants to feel pain can feel the pain. Chu Yang blinked and revealed a heavy expression. He said, this name was given to me by my master. My master's kindness to me is as heavy as a mountain. Moreover, this name contains the most important wish of my master's life. I really don't want to change it. Chu Failing breathed a sigh of relief and said, I see. Since you don't want to change it, I'll go and talk to my father. Your master has nurtured you and taught you. We must not be ungrateful. When we meet, I'll definitely give him a toast. Chu Yang breathed a sigh of relief. To be honest, he really didn't like the name Chu Tingyang at all. Even if you don't change your fate, you still need a nickname, right? Chu Failing touched his chin and said, how about Tung? This way you'll have seniority. Tung? Chu Yang was stunned. He looked at Chu Failing in horror and couldn't speak for a long time. Before he spoke, Yang Ruolan exploded. What Tung? Chu Failing. Shut the hell up. My son's name will be Chu Yang. His nickname will be Yang Yang. He's my son. I'll call the shots. Chu Failing's face darkened. If you call me your son, you'll have to call me an elder. Yang Ruolan glared at him and said, do you have the right to speak? Chu Failing wanted to cry but had no tears. At this moment a voice said, what elder? It was Master Chu Xiongqing, who was dragging an old man with a white beard. He strode in. It was the #1 doctor in the Chu clan, Dr. Chiao. Chu Failing was scared out of his wits. He hurriedly greeted him. Cough, elder. That means, cough, in our Chu clan, this child has a lot of elders. He has to know the rules in the future. Cough, yes. Master Chu Xiongqing didn't bother to listen to his explanation. He responded casually and said, I see. Then he urged Dr. Chiao to treat his grandson. Chu Failing secretly wiped away his cold sweat and sat down on the chair. He suddenly felt that there was a volcano under his, but the kind that could erupt at any time. This day, he couldn't live on. Dr. Chiao put his fingers on Chu Yang's pulse and frowned. It's a little strange. Why is there such a pulse? What's wrong? Chu Feiling, Chu Xiongqing and Yang Ruolan asked at the same time. The pulse is a little strange. Dr. Chiu frowned and frowned. I've never seen this before. Is it good or bad? Master Chu Xiongqing hurriedly interrupted and thought. Could it be that our Chu clan has another genius? This young master's meridians seem to have some elemental energy, and it's quite a lot. This shows that young master was very diligent in his cultivation. Dr. Chiu pursed his lips and didn't know how to continue. What's next? Master Chu's eyes were fervent. But I don't know why, but he's injured this. It seems that his meridians have been restrained. There's a break point in his meridians. Dr. Chiu frowned. In other words, his cultivation has been destroyed. His cultivation has been destroyed. This sentence was really shocking. Chu Xiongqing, Chu Feiling and Yang Ruolan exclaimed at the same time. Divine Physician Chiu's expression was grave. If I'm not mistaken, young master must have offended some powerful cultivator, and this powerful cultivator must have placed a seal under young master's meridians. After a few days of rest, he'll be able to move freely. But if he wants to improve his cultivation, I'm afraid it'll be difficult. Let me see. Master Chu couldn't wait and grabbed Chu Yang's wrist. His monarch-level elemental energy surged into his meridians. His brows furrowed tighter and tighter, and his expression became more and more unpleasant. That's right. Chu Yang's meridians and vital energy were very dense. It was even far beyond the normal level that he could reach at his age. He could be said to be a super genius. But there were a few inexplicable obstructions in his meridians that prevented his elemental energy from flowing. With his monarch-level strength, it was as if he was facing a steel mountain. He didn't waver at all. Who did you offend? Who did this? Master Chu couldn't figure it out. Since this person was able to set up such a restriction, if he wanted to kill Chu Yang, he could do it thousands of times with a flip of his hand. Why did he spend so much effort to restrain Chu Yang's body? I don't know either. Chu Yang looked innocent. You're right. You won't be able to detect it even if you want to. Chu Xiongqing sighed and said, I'll ask the elder to take a look at you when he comes out of seclusion. After that, he stood up and said, Fei Ling, tell the child about our clan. Let him rest for the next few days. When the elder comes out of seclusion, I'll report to him. I'll go to the Medicine Valley personally. Yes, Chu Fei Ling said worriedly. Yang Ruolan grabbed Chu Yang's hand and comforted him. Yang, don't be afraid. Don't be depressed. You'll be fine. Chu Yang said, I'm not worried. Of course he wasn't worried. Chu Yang was well aware of the situation in his body. This was clearly a temporary disorder caused by the overflowing of elemental energy and spirit. It wasn't a big deal at all. He just needed some time to straighten it out, and everything would return to normal. But this matter was really hard to explain. How could he explain? Could he say that he was the Tribulation Sword Master, and that he had swallowed the spirit of the first Tribulation Sword Master? If that was the case, Chu Yang reckoned that the elder would faint immediately. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. In these 2 days, Yang Ruolan didn't leave her son's side at all. She took care of him tirelessly. Finally, on the morning of the 3rd day, although Chu Yang's body was still weak, he could get out of bed with his own strength. He stood up and walked around the courtyard. Chu Yang regained the ability to move on this day. All his strength was accumulated in his meridians and consciousness. Although Chu Yang's body didn't have any strength now, his spirit was becoming more solid day by day. If the spirit of an ordinary person was a light smoke, then the spirit of an expert was a piece of white paper with a shape. The spirit of a super expert was like a towering tree. And now, Chu Yang's divine soul was already a verdant little tree that was growing healthily. And his spirit tree was different from other trees. Compared to an ordinary expert, his spirit tree was a golden crystal jade sandalwood. Golden crystal jade sandalwood was the toughest tree in the heavenly continent. This tree only existed in legends. It was said that it could even withstand the attack of a supreme martial artist. And in these few days, Chu Yang understood the situation of the Chu clan thoroughly. There were 2 mysterious elders in the Chu clan who were in seclusion all year round. His grandfather, Chu Xiongqing, had 2 brothers. But his second brother, Chu Xiongwei, went missing when he was in his prime. No one knew if he was alive or dead. Below them were his father's generation. The four brothers were Chu Feiling, Chu Feilong, Chu Feian and Chu Fian. Together, they were a homonym of exquisite smoke. Chu Yang didn't know if there was a meaning behind this. In his generation, Chu Feilong had 3 sons, Chu Feian had 2 sons and 1 daughter, and Chu Fian had 1 daughter. It seemed that Chu Feian's daughter, Chu Luer, was born with a chronic illness. Chu Feian spent most of his time outside looking for medicine and was rarely at home. The Chu clan was located in the flat mountain ridge in the southeast corner of the upper 3 heavens. It was one of the 3 big clans there. The Chu clan's strength wasn't considered a super clan in the upper 3 heavens. It was barely considered a small clan that could establish itself. Chu Yang once asked about the Wind Thunder platform intentionally, because in his previous life, he received the summon of the 5th fragment of the Calamity, sword at the Wind Thunder platform. But Chu Feiling's answer made Chu Yang smile bitterly. The Wind Thunder platform was located in the northwest of the upper 3 heavens. It was extremely desolate. It was more than 37,000 miles away from his current location. Chapter 741. The situation in the upper 3 heavens was complicated. The Chu clan was content to stay in one corner, but there were also constant conflicts in the open and in the dark. The current strength of the Chu clan was basically in the hands of the clan master. The high-level experts were basically the seniors of the Chu clan. They were all in seclusion when they had nothing to do. The other 2 big clans in the flat mountain ridge, the Bao clan and the Liao clan, were slightly weaker than the Chu clan, but not by much. The 2 clans were abnormally strong. Small frictions and conflicts happened every day. And this flat mountain ridge, and the entire southeast area after the flat mountain ridge belonged to the Xiao clan, one of the big dominant clans. There were dragons and crouching tigers, strange people and sections. They were fighting for the chance to survive in the cruel survival of the fittest. A piece of land in the east, a Xiao in the southeast, 10,000 miles of waves in the west. These were the clans Xiao clan and Qin clan. Shocking stones in the northwest, Proud Ling clan in the southwest, fragrant orchids in the south. These were the Shi clan, Ling clan and Long clan. Sharp swords in the north, mighty Zhuge clan in the south. These were the Li clan, Zhuge clan and Yi clan. These were the big dominant clans in the upper 3 heavens. The big clans each dominated a region. In the recent thousands of years, there were always some clans that emerged to fight for power and territory. Some clans even wanted to be independent and not be controlled by the big clans. Some clans even wanted to replace the big clans. These clans, without exception, were all annihilated. But it could also be seen that the big clans' control over the upper 3 heavens was not as good as before. The upper 3 heavens had been around for tens of thousands of years. Naturally, not everyone in the upper 3 heavens was a cultivator. There were more ordinary people. So, the basic necessities here could still be settled with gold and silver. But, as long as it involved the business of the big clans, it was a different situation. In the group of cultivators, they used spiritual energy to pave the way and crystal stones as currency to buy or exchange the items they wanted. Crystal stones were not only a currency, but also a source of spiritual energy for cultivation. Purple crystal, black crystal, red crystal, blue crystal and white crystal. 1 purple crystal was equivalent to 10 black crystals. 1 black crystal was equivalent to 10 red crystals, and so on. 1 purple crystal that was circulated by the government was equivalent to 10,000 white crystals. This was the ratio. King of Hell Chu felt that he was a pauper. He had never felt so poor before. After accepting Duke Yu's white crystal ores, other than absorbing them, he also stored 7,000 to 8,000 pieces in his tribulation space. He had originally thought that this was a very, very large sum of wealth. Who would have thought that it was actually not even enough to exchange for a single purple crystal? As for the mountains of gold and silver in the space, King of Hell Chu sighed. I'll donate those to the clan in a few days. Letting the clan steward use it to do business with ordinary people, he really had no use for it. Motherfucker. I've been in the lower 3 heavens for half a lifetime. Everyone in the lower 3 heavens is either afraid of me or admiring me. I can also command a region in the lower three heavens. I didn't expect that I would become a small shrimp in the upper three heavens. Moreover, I'm a poor shrimp. In his previous life, although Chu Yang had reached the upper three heavens, he had only been a mere revered martial artist. He had taken a huge risk before he finally found an unknown channel and went straight to the Wind Thunder platform. They had to eat and sleep in the open along the way. They had to hide from place to place. When they finally arrived, they were immediately killed by Mo Tianji and his people. It could be said that he knew nothing about Wu Santian. For the current Chu Yang, even though he had the experience of 2 lifetimes, this upper three heavens was still a completely unfamiliar world. Especially the big dominant clans that ruled the upper three heavens. Almost every clan had their own rules and taboos in their territory. In this way, the chances of conflict in the Jianghu would increase by 100 times. Not to mention that other than the big clans, in such a vast area like the upper three heavens, there were many different forces. And any one of these forces was not something that the current Chu Yang could afford to offend. Everything was completely different from the lower three heavens and the upper three heavens. Whether it was the customs or the ways of the Jianghu, they were all completely different. When Chu Yang had just finished listening, he was actually a little stunned. He remembered a sentence that Duke Yu and Diwu Qingro had said before. Actually, these are really nothing. Now that he thought about it, these words were really reasonable. The reason why Diwu Qingro admitted defeat so easily and did him a big favor, while he himself obtained great luck, was because in his heart, these are really nothing. Indeed, they are nothing. Compared to the colorful world of the upper three heavens, the lower three heavens and the upper three heavens were like child's play. As for the so-called experts of the upper three heavens and the lower three heavens, in the vast world of the upper three heavens, they were even less than a fart. Chu Yang had a feeling. I am a pauper, but I came to a world full of millionaires. What made him the most speechless was that the millionaires in his eyes were still at the lowest level here. He was like a beggar who suddenly came to a state banquet. There was a dazzling lineup, but it could not hide the confusion in his heart. What should I do? At night, Chu Yang lay on the bed, unable to fall asleep for a long time. Finally, he gritted his teeth and thought, what am I, Chu Yang, afraid of? Didn't I come from beyond the heavens sect as a commoner? What am I afraid of? Didn't I still become the hegemony of Iron Cloud? When I first came to the upper three heavens, wasn't I alone and unarmed? In the end, didn't I overturn the entire upper three heavens? The upper three heavens is just a little bigger. That's all. He encouraged himself, and then began to plan what to do next. It was impossible to find the 5th fragment of the Tribulation Sword in a short time. He could only establish a foothold in the clan, then build up the clan and develop it step by step. When he was strong enough and met the standards of the 5th fragment, he could go and find it. Before that, he could not let anyone find out about his identity. Therefore, he had to abandon everything in the past. Everything had to start from the beginning. I am a pauper now. I have to put myself at the lowest level of the entire world, then climb up step by step. As long as I have the slightest arrogance, I am afraid I will die without a burial place. Chu Yang slowly made up his mind, and his heart slowly calmed down. His identity as king of Hell Chu could not be mentioned again. He was an abandoned child that his parents found with great difficulty. As for his origin, he might as well use his brain. The name King of Hell Chu was famous in the lower three heavens, but there were very few people in the upper three heavens who would pay attention to it. In a huge world like the upper three heavens, there was probably no one who would put King of Hell Chu in their eyes. If he wanted to hide, he had a great chance. After a period of silence, he could slowly appear again. Then, no one would associate him with the Tribulation Sword Master. Thinking of this, Chu Yang suddenly realized that Divine Dr. Chio's diagnosis of his cultivation being crippled was actually the best amulet in his current situation. Yes, Old Wu was crippled. Old Wu had to cultivate from the beginning. Have you ever seen a Tribulation Sword Master being crippled? Is this a joke? With this layer of protection, whatever he did would not attract much attention. If he secretly recovered his strength, not only could he protect himself, but more importantly, he could also trick people. Of course, during this period of time, he could not avoid seeking medical treatment. Although it was a little troublesome for the clan, Chu Feilong was now in charge. This old man had always been eyeing the three of them covetously. I will let him run errands for me. Of course, mother would also be worried. I will accompany her and coax her during this period of time, and everything will be fine. When I recover my cultivation and gradually rise up, I will treat it as compensation for her. Mother, one day, I will let you be proud of me. To manage external affairs, one must first settle internal affairs. The Chu family must be forged into a solid block of iron, as the first step. Otherwise, with such a huge burden and concern here, he would be played to death by the big clans. And the rise of the clan depended on strength and wealth. Strength was martial power. Wealth was motherfucker's crystal stones. Minister Chu gritted his teeth. Even if old Wu had to cheat and steal, he would still become the richest person in the heavens. Motherfucker, you're so insidious. A voice sounded a little tired. Chu Yang was stunned. His divine sense entered the space of his consciousness, and he could not help but be surprised. You're awake? The one who spoke was the sword spirit. Your divine sense has been fixed forever. How can I not wake up? The sword spirit smiled bitterly. You're in the upper three heavens? Yes. Chu Yang nodded honestly. You're too weak now. So your plan just now is completely feasible. The sword spirit pondered for a while and said, I basically agree with your approach and plan. Making a fortune quietly is the way of a king. He paused and reminded, I'm already awake now. I'll be able to recover in 3 days at most. In another half a month, I'll have the cultivation of the 4th fragment of the tribulation sword. Moreover, your divine sense has been fixed forever. Now that I'm in your body, there's no harm to your divine sense. So if you're in absolute danger, or if you need to kill all of them, just call me out. He smiled ferociously. After 10,000 years, I can't wait to see what the experts of the upper three heavens are like now. Chu Yang smiled deeply. Don't worry, there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to make a move. The sword spirit smiled knowingly. A murderous aura reverberated back and forth in the tribulation space, as if a demon that had been suppressed for 10,000 years was showing its ferocious fangs. Chu Feiling and Yang Ruolin were also sleepless that night when Chu Yang was making his plans. Say, what should we do about that? Yang Ruolin frowned. There's nothing we can do. Chu Feiling sighed and lay beside his wife, somewhat absent-minded. Ever since his son went missing, he had been deprived of the right to share a bed with his wife. These few days, he had finally received the emperor's grace. Chu Feiling felt that the bitterness was over, and the sweetness was about to come. There's nothing we can do? Yang Ruolin raised her eyebrows. Is my grandson going to stay in the lower three heavens like this? Then what do you want? Chu Feiling said innocently. Firstly, your junior sister begged us not to tell him. We have to worry about this, don't we? If we fall out, she won't even let you see your grandson. That'll be really bad. Secondly, Yang has lost his cultivation, and his meridians have been destroyed. Although he's forcing a smile every day to make us happy, we're all martial artists. How can we not know this feeling? If we mention this now, won't we only make him sad and worried? But we can't do anything about it. Won't this be torture? Alas! Yang Ruolin sighed. She was upset, and her heart was in a mess. After Chu Feiling finished speaking, he saw that his wife was no longer speaking, so he felt relieved. He leaned towards his wife and said gently, Let's sleep. Yang Ruolin was anxious, and had no mood to think. She shouted angrily, Get out! She stomped her foot. With a thud, Chu Feiling flew out of the bed and sat on the ground. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Chapter 742. The next morning, Chu Yang told Chu Feiling about his plans. Chu Feiling was worried that if Chu Yang's identity was made public, it would cause unnecessary trouble. Moreover, people would use this as an excuse to attack him. Now that he heard Chu Yang's suggestion, it was exactly what he wanted and he agreed. He discussed a plan with his wife. When he was traveling in the three heavens, he accidentally found the purple crystal jade essence, and then realized that it was his son. The whole family discussed this matter peacefully for a long time. After settling this matter, Everyone felt as if a burden had been lifted from their minds. "Father, you don't look too good." Chu Yang realized that Chu Feiling's face was a little pale, and his eyes were a little red. He looked a little dispirited. Sigh. "It's a long story. How could Chu Feiling tell his son about his shameful past?" he said vaguely. Yang Ruolan blushed and looked at Chu Feiling. She was a little embarrassed. How could she not understand that Chu Feiling had been deprived of his right to do that when he was in his prime? And until now, he had never been a womanizer for 18 years. Such a man was a rare and responsible man even in the entire heavens world. Not to mention his cultivation, tolerance, and other aspects. Just this point alone was enough to make anyone admire him. She thought. If there's no harm in it. As she thought about it, her face blushed even more. Chu Yang saw that his parents' expressions became awkward, and he couldn't help but laugh. He winked and said meaningfully, I know. Chu Feiling and Yang Ruolan slapped him and reprimanded him in unison. What do you know? Chu Yang staggered from the slap. At this moment, Old Master Chu Xiongqing sent someone to report that he had invited a doctor and was about to come. These few days, Old Master had been coming here several times a day. It was obvious that he was very concerned. As for the doctors he had brought, there were more than 10 of them. Each of them was called a divine doctor in the local area. But after a long time, there was no effect. The miraculous doctors had all come with great ambitions and left dejectedly. Gradually, Chu Feiling and his wife lost all hope. After a while, Old Master came with a divine doctor. After a round of examination, he still left without any solution. The Old Master stayed behind. He didn't say anything and just sighed. The Old Master was worried about the Chu family's inheritance. This was a huge matter. Throughout history, the inheritance of aristocratic families was passed down to the elders and not to the young. It was to prevent brothers from killing each other. However, in Chu Feiling's generation, there was a problem. Originally, Chu Feiling's ability was more than enough to take over the position of clan master. However, she had strangely lost her own son, and since then, she had never had another child. In that case, there would be no successor. Besides, Chu Feiling had been depressed ever since he lost his son. He only cared about finding a son to comfort his wife, and he didn't pay much attention to the family affairs. Old Master had no choice but to let Chu Feilong take over. But I didn't expect that Chu Feilong's scheming methods were not inferior to Chu Feiling's. In fact, he was even better than Chu Feiling. He managed the entire Chu clan in an orderly manner, and it was thriving day by day. As a result, Old Master Chu began to mutter in his heart. Over the years, Chu Feilong's position had been confirmed, but he didn't expect that Chu Feilong would be found. This made Old Master ecstatic, but he was completely conflicted. Then, he saw that Sun Emo had a fight with his second uncle the moment he woke up, and even gained the upper hand. Old Master's heart began to move again. This fellow is definitely not a well-behaved fellow. If the position was passed to Chu Feilong, this fellow would definitely turn the Chu clan upside down in a few years' time. Therefore, Old Master had the idea of passing the position down to the elders. But just as he had this idea, he heard that Sun Emo had been crippled. Old Master, who had just come out of a volcano, was suddenly thrown into an ice cave. This emotional journey was like riding a roller coaster. It was simply unbearable. Fortunately, Old Master didn't have a heart disease. Otherwise, his illness would have already acted up. Old Master held on to the slightest hope that Sun Emo could be cured. He kept looking for divine doctors to treat Sun Emo, so that he could be cured quickly. But he didn't expect the divine doctors to shake their heads and stare. They were helpless. There was no need to mention how awkward Old Master's heart was. He shook his head and sighed for a while. Then he sat down and comforted Chu Yang. What kind of eloquence did Minister Chu have? With just a few words, he managed to coax Old Master into a happy mood. Old Master squinted his eyes and stroked his beard. He felt that this Sun Emo was really to his liking. Smart, resourceful, and scheming. Once Sun Emo was cured, he would also have strength. Where could he find such a successor to the clan? But on the surface, he still kept a straight face and said, "Don't give me that. You only know how to flatter me." Chu Yang's face was full of admiration. He spread out his hands and said helplessly, "Look, if it was an ordinary person, he would have fainted. Only grandfather is so wise. You can tell that I'm flattering you at a glance. This really makes me feel a little defeated. Sigh, there are so many wise people in the heavens, but how many of them are deceived by others? It's impossible for second grandfather. Grandfather's eyes are like torches. He can see through everything. He's quick-witted and vigorous even though he's old. He saw through my thoughts clearly." Facing such a wise grandfather, flattery will definitely not work. I can only tell the truth in the future. Old Master's back straightened even more. He squinted his eyes and stroked his beard. He smiled deeply and said, "That's right. How can I be coaxed by a few words from a brat like you? Grandfather is so wise. I'm also experienced and knowledgeable. I've never seen a powerful person as clear-headed as you." Minister Chu said from the bottom of his heart, "These words are reasonable. How can those vulgar people be compared to me?" Old Master crossed his legs. He looked like he was floating in the air. Chu Yang once again threw out one flattery after another, as if it was free of charge. Master accepted all of them. Yang Ruolan and Chu Feiling sat on one side in a daze. They only felt goosebumps all over their bodies. Their whole body was alternating between hot and cold. They looked at the shameless grandfather and grandson in disbelief. They only felt dizzy. Their father, who had always been majestic, would fly into a rage when he saw others flattering him. Now he was more dizzy than anyone else. This well-behaved son, who looked upright, was now crazily flattering him. He said it so sincerely and innocently. The husband and wife only felt that they couldn't understand the ways of the world. After a long time, when Minister Chu's mouth was about to dry up, the old master finally stood up and said, "You guys chat, ha ha ha. My good grandson, you're really a good and considerate child. Grandpa will come and talk to you when he has time." Then, as if he was riding the clouds and riding the mist, he floated out of the room. He thought to himself, looks like it won't be too late to look at the inheritance later. Chu Yang wiped his sweat and said, "That's amazing. Old Master's tolerance is too strong. An ordinary person would probably be blushing after being flattered by me for a third of the time." Old Master's face didn't even turn red from the beginning to the end. Yang Ruolan and Chu Feiling looked at each other. They were speechless, like two ducks who were struck dumb by lightning. In the afternoon, everyone in the Chu clan knelt down and kowtowed under the leadership of Chu Xiongcheng. Then, Chu Yang went forward and kowtowed to the ancestors one by one. The whole process was solemn. This announced that the eldest grandson of the Chu clan had finally returned. Minister Chu's face was solemn, and he muttered in his heart, Chu Yang, who had been surnamed Chu for 10 years, was finally considered a member of the Chu clan today. Then, Old Master Chu Xiongcheng announced in public, Chu Yang was officially recognized as the eldest grandson of the Chu clan. From today onwards, Chu Yang's monthly salary would be distributed according to the standard of a direct descendant. Every month, he would receive 2 blue crystals and 50 white crystals. In addition, he would receive 500 taels of silver and 20 taels of gold for daily needs. When this decision was made, no one had any objections. Even Chu Feilong, who was angered by Chu Yang to the point of vomiting blood, seemed to have returned to normal today. He had a warm smile on his face and a graceful demeanor. The way he looked at Chu Yang was also filled with warmth. It was as if nothing had happened. This was his favorite nephew. Even with Chu Yang's scheming mind, he couldn't help but be shocked. Chu Feilong's scheming mind was indeed not to be underestimated. After suffering such humiliation, he actually acted as if nothing had happened. Such a smiling tiger was the most difficult to deal with. Then it was time to greet the elders of the clan. Without exception, everyone gave a red packet. Chu Feilong handed over a red packet and laughed heartily. Naturally, Chu Yang was also respectful, friendly, and full of childlike feelings. This scene caused everyone in the hall to exclaim in admiration. The Chu clan's culture is indeed harmonious. Only old master Chu Xiongcheng, Chu Feiyan and Chu Feiling saw this scene and couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. This pair of uncle and nephew, if they didn't handle it well, the entire Chu clan would definitely be in a bloodbath. When Chu Yang met his fourth uncle Chu Fei Yen, the red packet he gave him was especially heavy. Chu Yang raised his head and saw a face full of anxiety and pleading. This face was very familiar. Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. He smiled and greeted his fourth uncle, but didn't say anything. Chu Fian was greatly relieved. He laughed heartily and patted Chu Yang's shoulder. What a great nephew. You're really talented, elegant and handsome. Haha, I'll look for you in a while. Let's get to know each other better as uncle. Chu Yang smiled and agreed. Everyone's jaws dropped to the ground. Fourth brother is the punching bag of the entire clan. He's always so inflexible, as if everyone owes him a lot of money. When did he become so enthusiastic? Look at all the praises. His nephew whom he had just met had been praised to the point of being a flower. Chu Fei Long's eyes flashed, and he glanced at Chu Fei Yin intentionally. Then, a few brothers came up to greet Chu Yang. Chu Tinghu came up first and stared at Chu Yang for a while before he finally greeted. Big brother. You may dispense with the formalities, Chu Yang said in an ostentatious manner. Chu Tinghu smiled and stepped aside. Chu Yang muttered in his heart. Just like me, he's also a smiling tiger. However, his skills are still too low. Chapter 743. The few little brothers came up to greet him one by one. Chu Yang also received them with a smile. Then two little Lolas walked over. This is your third uncle's daughter Lu'er. This is your fourth uncle's daughter Xiao Xiao. Yang Rulan's eyes were full of pity. Chu Yang took a look and saw that Chu Lu'er was only 11 or 12 years old, while Chu Xiaoxiao was only 5 years old. Chu Xiaoxiao was adorable and innocent. She took Chu Yang's red packet and jumped with joy. Her big eyes narrowed into crescents. As for Chu Lu'er, Chu Yang didn't know what to say. Her hair was a little yellow, and her eyes were lifeless. She was frighteningly thin. Light green blood vessels were clearly visible on her fair skin. It was just a few steps, but she actually walked for a while. She was so tired that she was panting. She almost fainted when she bent down. Chu Yang hurriedly supported her and said, Lu'er, you don't have to be so polite. Then he asked, Sister Lu'er, are you feeling unwell? Chu Lu'er smiled bleakly and said, I'm fine. Don't worry. Chu Yang was about to ask when Yang Rulan secretly gave him a look. Chu Yang could only swallow the question back into his stomach. A beautiful woman came out and carefully helped Chu Lu'er back. Her face was full of sorrow. Chu Yang looked at Chu Lu'er's back and was in a daze. Although Chu Lu'er was young, there was already a sense of despair in her eyes. Moreover, whether it was her expression or her aura, it was very similar to Mo Qingwu's expression when she was rejected by him in his previous life. It was a feeling of utter despair and despair, a feeling of sadness and sadness. Chu Yang's heart couldn't help but ache. On the way back, Yang Rulan sighed and said, Lu'er's life is too hard. She's such a lovable little girl, but she contracted such a strange disease. Strange disease? Chu Yang asked. Yes, Yang Rulan said. When your third aunt was pregnant with Lu'er, she was ambushed on the road and fought with them. Her fetus was hurt. At that time, no one thought much of it. But after Lu'er was born, she had a high fever and cried all night. It was only later that we got a doctor to take a look that we found out that the fetus was finally affected. Congenital deficiency. Yang Ruolan remained silent for a while. Then she said these words. But if it was a simple congenital deficiency, it wouldn't be so serious. During this time, Chu Yang had been trying his best to digest the memories of the first-generation tribulation swordmaster. Among them, there were medical skills. In addition, he was not unfamiliar with medical skills. Ever since he received the medical books from Du Shiqing, his attainments were already extraordinary. Naturally, he could tell that Yang Ruolan was hiding something from him. Congenital deficiency? Yes, she suffered a concussion in her mother's womb. I don't know what happened, but she injured her head. Every day, he would have a headache, and his entire body would convulse and roll around in pain. Sometimes she would suddenly fall into a coma for a long time. Usually, she would be very sleepy. Such a good little girl. To be tormented by this strange illness, sigh. Yang Ruolan let out a long sigh. There are so many divine doctors, is there really no way? Chu Yang frowned. There's nothing I can do. Yang Ruolan said a little angrily. Those bunch of quacks didn't even find the cause of the illness. They could only see the child in pain, but couldn't do anything. They didn't even have a way to reduce the child's pain. They could only watch the child continue to suffer. Sigh, for this child's illness, your third uncle has been out searching for elixirs all year round. He would only come home once when he found one. Your third aunt is younger than me this year. It looks like she's already much older than me. Even when her illness doesn't act up, she still has headaches. When it acts up, it's only 10 times worse. In other words, Lu'er is 11 years old this year. For the past 11 years, she has been in pain almost all the time. So that's how it is, Chu Yang said. Owen frowned. No wonder Chu Lu'er had that kind of expression. She had been enduring this kind of pain all the time. She had already endured it for as long as her life was long. Chu Yang sighed deeply in his heart. How could this kind of pain be endured by a little girl who was like a flower? But not only did Chu Lu'er endure it, she had already endured it for 11 years. How did she endure it for 11 years? Would heavy pills be effective for this kind of illness? Normal heavy pills won't be effective, the sword spirit said in his consciousness. This illness is congenital. Her meridians are congenitally blocked and twisted. In her brain, there's also an extremely fine kind of damage. Normal medicines won't work at all. Normal medicines won't work? Chu Yang pondered and said. That means there's still a way. Yes, but this method is also quite difficult. It needs to be gathered together before it can be treated, the sword spirit said. Gathered together? Chu Yang asked. Gathered together means absolute vine, colored lotus, single flower, jade clover ganoderma, life pangolin, lifeless death water, heavenly jade elixir, earth een soul ginseng, together with the ingredients for heavy pills and other rare herbs, to refine 3 special incomplete heavy pills. Only by taking 1 pill every month can the illness be completely cured. The sword spirit's words made Chu Yang suck in a breath of cold air. Not to mention how difficult it was to find these 8 herbs. Just their medicinal power alone was enough to shock people. Other than the jade clover ganoderma and heavenly jade elixir, the rest were all highly toxic. And all of them were top-class poisons in the world. It was one of the 10 most toxic poisons in the heavenly layer. When these poisons were mixed together, even a supreme martial artist would be poisoned to death. Now they were actually used to treat a little girl who was like a flower? It's the limit. Life also means death. Only between life and death can one come back from the dead. Your sister's life is already on the verge of extinction. And it's a congenital illness that's even more difficult to treat. That's why it needs to be gathered together, the sword spirit said. If she can't be treated within 2 years, I'm afraid. 2 years. Chu Yang's eyes flickered. Some of these medicines should be able to be bought. Is there a way to temporarily reduce her pain? Not to give her a headache? Chu Yang asked. The sword spirit hesitated and said, for the time being there shouldn't be, unless I personally used the power of my 10,000-year spirit to suppress it for her. However, it can only be suppressed for 3 months at a time. After 3 months, it needs to be suppressed again. Chu Yang said, that's best. Why don't you suppress it for her? The sword spirit rolled his eyes. Do you know that if the medicinal ingredients aren't found after 2 years, she won't be able to hold on? And if I suppress it for her at that time, I can suppress it for another 2 years. In other words, I can extend her lifespan by 2 years. And if I suppress it for her now, I can only suppress it for 2 years at the longest. After 2 years, if the medicinal ingredients aren't found, even the gods won't be able to save her. Why only 2 years? Chu Yang was puzzled. Because her lifespan is only 2 years. So I can only suppress it for 2 years. Even if I don't suppress it now, I have to leave my spirit power for when her life is extinguished 2 years later. Suppress it. In other words, after I see her, there's only 2 years left. The sword spirit said. You decide what to do. Anyway, this doesn't cost me anything. Even if I suppress it, I won't use much of my spirit power. Besides, your spirit is eternally stable now, which has also caused my spirit to be eternally stable. I don't care. You don't care, but I do. Chu Yang was conflicted. Of course, he didn't care about the spirit power. What he cared about was, If he couldn't find the medicinal ingredients in 2 years, what would he do? He sighed and couldn't make up his mind. As soon as he returned to his parents' courtyard, he was informed that his fourth uncle, Chu Fian, had come to visit. Chu Yang's spirits were lifted. Invite him in. Chu Fian sneaked in sneakily and laughed dryly. Big brother, sister-in-law, eldest nephew, you're all here. Ha 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 ha. Chu Failing frowned. Young Rulin was dumbfounded. Fourth brother, are you sick? Chu Failing frowned and looked at his fourth brother with dissatisfaction. You're an old man with children. How can you be so undignified in front of the younger generation? Chu Fian nodded his head and bowed as he agreed. He thought to himself, my sins are now in your son's hands. If he says anything, I'll be beaten to a pulp. How can I still act like an elder? Big brother, sister-in-law, shouldn't you leave? Leave for a while? Chu Fian laughed. I have something to discuss with eldest nephew, something to discuss. You know each other? Yang Rulin looked at Chu Fian suspiciously. Chu Fian immediately broke out in a cold sweat and shook his head like a rattledrum. I don't know him. If you don't know him, why are you talking to him? Yang Rulin scrutinized him. I'll talk. I'll play. Large beads of sweat dripped from Chu Fian's forehead. Can't I talk to him for fun? Chu Failing and Yang Rulin were speechless. They suddenly felt that the whole family seemed to be different since our son came back. What's going on? I'm talking to your son. It's inconvenient for the two of you to be here. Chu Fian pulled Chu Failing and Yang Rulin out of the door. Then, he closed the door and heaved a long sigh of relief. What kind of exquisite mind does Minister Chu have? He knew at a glance that this guy didn't dare to say that he had seen him before. Well, why didn't he dare to say it? Well, he understood. The whole family had been looking for him for 18 years. He even followed him for a long time, and didn't tell the family that he had seen him. Not to mention the family, if he said it, even his parents would tear him apart alive. Once he figured it out, Minister Chu immediately felt assured. At the same time, his heart suddenly brightened. Isn't this a very capable assistant? As long as, I can ask him to help me with anything. Looking at Chu Fian, who had turned his head back, Chu Yang said with a half-smile. So you're my fourth uncle. It's been a long time. Ha ha ha. Chu Fian's face turned bitter. He lowered his voice and said, Eldest nephew, I'm here to discuss something with you. Alas, you must help me. Chapter 744. What the hell? Chu Yang looked at Chu Fei Yin with a half-smile and crossed his legs. Fourth uncle, I'm very busy. My time is precious. Chu Fei Yin felt disgusted, but he couldn't do anything about it. He laughed dryly. Ha ha ha. Chu Yang exclaimed. Hey, I'll make tea for fourth uncle. Don't trouble yourself. Chu Fei Yin hurriedly dissuaded him. Even if this little brat put croton in the tea, he could only bear with it. How could he let him make tea? Others didn't know how powerful King of Hell Chu was, but Chu Fei Yin was in the lower three heavens. How could he not know? This was a powerful person who overturned the lower three heavens, when he was only a martial arts great master. In terms of scheming, Chu Fei Yin absolutely believed that no one in the Chu clan was a match for this young man in front of him. Although this guy looked harmless, if he really opened his mouth and bit someone, even a supreme martial artist would tremble. After he modestly declined, he was startled. This bastard said that he was going to make tea, but his butt was firmly stuck on the chair. He didn't even move an inch. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Little brat. But how could he not lower his head? He laughed dryly. Nephew, you're too enthusiastic. Chu Yang smiled gently. Third uncle, you're too polite. The two of them looked at each other and smiled at each other. The only difference was that Chu Fei Yan's smile was as bitter as Chinese gold thread, while Chu Yang's smile was as sweet as honey. Fourth uncle, what can I do for you? Minister Chu asked innocently. Chu Fei Yan shuddered and looked around. He leaned over and lowered his voice. Nephew, please don't tell me that I've seen you in the lower three heavens. Why? Chu Yang grinned and raised his eyebrows, revealing an extremely fake puzzled expression. Cough cough cough. Chu Fei Yin was so angry that he almost died. He looked at Chu Yang with a crooked mouth and an impulse to twitch. Bastard, you obviously know better than anyone else. But you're playing with me here. Just you wait. When I turn over a new leaf, if I don't catch you and smack your butt, I'll. In the end, he swallowed his anger and swallowed his anger. He knew that since this fellow had grasped his weakness, the chances of him turning the tables on this bastard was basically zero. Fourth uncle, you should know that this nephew has just arrived in the upper three heavens. There are many things that I don't understand. I don't know the ropes. Chu Yang changed the topic of discussion. Yes. Chu Feiyin could only agree casually. He thought to himself, what is this guy thinking? Little nephew, it's difficult now. Chu Yang let out a long sigh. Chu Feiyin was speechless. For example, I have medical skills, but there's no place for me to use them. Chu Yang lamented. Chu Feiyin was stunned. Medical skills. For example, I'm poor now. Chu Yang's voice was full of emotion. Fourth uncle, please be the judge. 50 white crystals and 2 blue crystals per month. What can I do with this? As for gold and silver, they're just a bunch of trash. Chu Feiyin said in a daze. But it's always been done this way. All the direct descendants of the Chu clan are treated equally. That's why I said it's not enough. Chu Yang looked at Chu Feiyin with disappointment. He increasingly felt that this fourth uncle of his was a little dull. Then what do you think we should do? Chu Feiyin asked. Why didn't you say this earlier? Do you know how long I've been waiting for you to say this? Chu Yang complained in his heart. He said enthusiastically, what else can we do? Third uncle, I need your help. Let's work together to earn big money. Each of us can get 10 million purple crystals. How cool is that? Chu Feiyin's eyes widened. 10 million purple crystals? You're not dreaming, right? There's so much in the upper heavens. Fourth uncle, you should know my ability. This is just a piece of cake for me, Chu Yang said confidently. What I lack now is a platform. That's all. Chu Feiyin said. So, in the entire clan only you can help me. Chu Yang hugged Chu Feiyin's shoulders enthusiastically. He winked at Chu Feiyin. Fourth uncle, will you help me? Chu Yang chuckled. Fourth uncle, you can't not help me. Chu Feiyin felt that he had fallen into a trap. Do I dare to say that I won't help you? You fucking changed the topic. Didn't you cover it up for so long just to trap me? If I say that I won't help you, I'm sure that you'll sell me to your grandfather and father in the next moment. Then I'll be in trouble. How can I help you? Chu Feiyin felt as if there was a mouthful of burning iron sand in his throat. It was so troublesome to speak. It's very simple. So and so. That'll do. Chu Yang was exultant. He patted Chu Feiyin's shoulders heavily. Fourth uncle, just wait to make a fortune. No matter what, I have to let you have some soup too, right? Chu Feiyin's face collapsed like a bitter gourd. Alas! Chu Feiyin sighed deeply. Although I'm a punching bag in the Chu clan, but I'm also an elder. This is the first time in my life that I've been threatened like this. Fourth uncle. Chu Yang said discontentedly. How is this threatening? We're cooperating sincerely. Alright, cooperation sincerely. Chu Feiyin was dejected. He really wanted to scold. How can cooperation be better than you, a brat, eating meat while I, as an uncle, can only drink soup? Besides, whether I can drink soup depends on whether you found your conscience. Chu Feiyin looked up at the sky miserably. He wanted to cry out loud, damn it, you bastard. Every time I came back, I was scolded by your parents and beaten by your grandfather. Now that I've finally found you, I've fallen into your evil hands again. Why is my life so bitter? Where should I start? Chu Feiyin lamented for a while and accepted his fate. To deal with external problems, one must first settle internal problems. Chu Yang said confidently. Isn't third aunt's Lua not in good health? Let me take a look at her. Lua. Chu Feiyin jumped up and widened his eyes. You can cure Lua. Take a look. Chu Yang looked at him discontentedly. Why are you making a fuss about nothing? Chu Feiyin was already on the move. If you can cure Lua, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for you. As he said, he couldn't help but sigh softly. That girl is really worrying. Chu Yang looked at him quietly. He looked at his fourth uncle who didn't seem to be scheming, but his eyes were filled with warmth and admiration. He slowly said, Fourth uncle, you are a good uncle. Chu Yang said this with sincerity. From the words, if you can cure Lu'er, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for you. Chu Yang felt a familial affection that he had never felt before. Only blood-related relatives would worry so much for their brother's daughter. Chu Feiyin snorted and said, "What nonsense are you spouting? If I don't even care about my own niece, then I'm worse than a beast." He paused. "Then you wait here, I'll go and talk to third sister-in-law. I'll see what she thinks." As he said, he rushed out hurriedly. Chu Feiling and his wife, who were waiting in the courtyard outside, were guessing why their fourth brother was looking for Chu Yang. However, they saw Chu Feiyin rush out like a gust of wind. He walked so fast that he almost knocked into Chu Feiling. He couldn't help but be confused. The sky was getting dark. What's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? Chu Feiling walked in and asked Chu Yang. "Oh, it's like this. We were talking about Lu'er's illness. I said that I've learned some medical skills before. So fourth uncle rushed out to look for third aunt." Chu Yang made an excuse. "You too. Just based on your mediocre medical skills, who can you possibly cure? You're making your third aunt happy for no reason." Yang Ruolan rebuked. Chu Feiling frowned. He thought of the magical elixirs that Chu Yang gave him. Who knew if they could cure Chu Lu'er's illness? "You still have those elixirs?" Chu Feiling's question made Yang Ruolan suddenly realize. "Yes, but not much," Chu Yang said. "But those elixirs can only treat injuries, nurse the body, and increase cultivation. They have no effect on congenital illnesses." "Oh, I see." Chu Feiling heaved a sigh of relief. Chu Yang suddenly thought of something. "Father, you must keep the fact that I gave you medicine to cure grandfather a secret. Don't tell anyone that I gave it to you." Chu Feiling glared at him. "I know better than you." Both father and son knew that if the Chu clan was peaceful, it wouldn't matter if they knew. However, now that Chu Feilong was here, they had to be careful. If Chu Feilong sold this information, Chu Yang would never have a day of peace. His life might even be in danger. How would Chu Feiling dare to take such a risk? Hurried footsteps came from outside the door. Then, Chu Feiyin rushed in like a gust of wind with the frail Chu Lu'er in his arms. He rushed in too quickly, and the wind blew into Chu Lu'er's mouth, causing her to cough. Behind him, another white figure rushed in under the twilight. It was Chu Lu'er's mother, Chu Yang's third aunt, Duan Shui. At this moment, she looked anxious, with a hint of expectation and anxiety. Chu Yang hurriedly stood up. "Third aunt." Duan Shui rushed over and grabbed Chu Yang's hand. Yang, can you cure Lu'er's illness?" Chu Yang said cautiously. "I've been taught medicine by an extraordinary person, so I have some attainments. However, whether I can cure her or not, I'll only know after seeing her." Then, Duan Shui said anxiously, "Why don't you take a look at Lu'er?" Her eyes reddened as she said, "Lu'er's illness, even the divine doctors of the Medicine Valley said that they couldn't do anything about it. Your third uncle and I are really exhausted after all these years." Yang Ruolin held Duan Shui's hand and comforted her softly. Chu Yang smiled and looked at Chu Lu'er, who was in Chu Feiyan's arms, and said, "Come, Sister Lu'er, let me take a look at you." Chapter 745. Chu Lu'er turned her head and looked at Chu Yang. She actually smiled quietly and said softly and slowly, "Big brother, sorry to trouble you." She struggled out of Chu Feiyan's arms and walked over quietly. Her expression was actually very calm. She even looked a little stupefied. At such a young age, she actually looked as if she had seen through life and death, and the ways of the world. Chu Yang knew that her illness was still ongoing. In other words, she was still having a headache now. But there was no trace of pain in this strong little girl's expression. She was already used to bearing it. The reason why she came here was so that her mother wouldn't be sad or worried about her. She was only 11 years old. Chu Yang also knew that she had actually completely given up on him. The reason why she came here was just to give her mother hope. That was all. She didn't think that he could cure her. In fact, even Duan Shui didn't think that Chu Yang would be able to cure her. But now, they had really reached the point where they were desperate to try anything. Even the most powerful Medicine Valley couldn't do anything about this illness. Who else could cure this illness? The reason why Duan Shui brought her daughter here was probably not to cure her daughter, but to tell her, Mother hasn't given up on you. You can't give up on yourself. Looking at Chu Luer's calm face, Chu Yang only felt his heart beating faintly. An extremely tender feeling surged up. This was his own little sister. She did not have any cultivation, nor did she have a prideful appearance. However, her determination and filial piety were enough to move anyone's heart. Sit down, Chu Yang said warmly. Chu Luer sat down quietly and stretched out her hand. Her palm faced up and laid it flat on the table. She was extremely familiar with this set of movements. Chu Yang looked and couldn't help but feel a tug in his heart again. Chu Luer's hand was perhaps only half the thickness of the arm of a little girl of her age. She was skinny with skin wrapped around bones. At such a young age, her skin was already wrinkled. Chu Yang took a deep breath and stretched out his finger to touch Chu Luer's wrist. In the tribulation space, a wisp of the sword spirit's consciousness entered Chu Luer's meridians through Chu Yang's finger. After a long time, it's basically the same as what I saw last time, the sword spirit instructed. Chu Yang's heart sank, and he loosened his fingers. How is it? Chu Feiyan asked nervously. Duan Shui clenched her fists and stood aside, not daring to ask. Chu Yang took a deep breath. He didn't say anything. His face was solemn. Everyone's expression immediately turned sorrowful. Almost every time, after the diagnosis of the godly doctor, they would have the same expression. Could it be Chu Luer sat quietly at her original spot? Her face was expressionless, as if everything around her had nothing to do with her. It was as if what Chu Yang was about to talk about was also an unrelated person's illness. She said softly, "Big brother, feel free to say it. I've already heard some words hundreds of times. Don't worry, it's nothing for me to hear it again." He had heard these words hundreds of times already. Chu Yang's heart ached again. He took a deep breath. He had no choice but to repeat the sword spirit's words. Sister Luer's illness is caused by a congenital injury. This kind of illness was very rare. Usually, if the fetus didn't die in the womb, it wouldn't live for more than 3 years after birth. But Sister Luer is already 11 years old this year. This shows how much effort third uncle and third aunt have put in all these years. You can actually tell. Duan Shui opened her mouth wide. She looked at Chu Yang, and for the first time, her eyes were filled with hope. Chu Yang said, "This kind of illness is a very subtle brain injury. The specific symptoms are constant headaches, drowsiness, confusion in the mind, spasms all over the body, or prolonged coma. The most painful part is cramping from the head to the shoulders, along the spine to the soles of the feet. It can even cause the whole body to curl up into a ball. This kind of feeling is even more unbearable than the cruelest torture in the world." Chu Luer stared at Chu Yang. Tears slowly slid down her cheeks and dripped down. Duan Shui covered her face with her hands. These were tears of pain, but also tears of hope. After so many years, this was the first time that someone had said it clearly after taking her pulse. At least, before this, no one else had said that the most severe part is cramping from the head to the shoulders, along the spine to the soles of the feet. Duan Shui was the one who understood this the best. Every time her daughter's illness acted up, she would hug her daughter tightly in her arms and feel her daughter's body twitching in vain. She could even see her daughter's tendons slowly bulging out, squirming and twisting at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, her daughter's body would completely change shape, and her heart would also be throbbing and breaking at that moment. "Can it be treated?" Chu Feiyan asked anxiously. "Treated?" Chu Yang took a deep breath and said, "It's very difficult to treat. Very difficult to treat." Chu Feiling, Chu Feiyan, Yang Ruolin and Duan Shui all shouted at the same time. Even Chu Luer, who was already disheartened, raised her head in a daze. Her eyes shone brightly as she looked at Chu Yang. Her dry, bloodless lips also began to tremble slightly. Very difficult to treat. What did that mean? Very difficult to treat. That meant it could still be treated. Although it was difficult, there was still hope. In the past, all the doctors, including the divine doctors from the Medicine Valley, would simply say that it couldn't be treated, or that it was incurable, and there was no way to treat it. At most, Only the high priest of the Medicine Valley gave a prescription to prolong one's life, which required a large amount of elixirs. He pointed out that as long as one had any of the elixirs in this prescription, one could prolong one's life. But at the same time, he pointed out that it could only prolong one's life until the age of 13. It was absolutely hopeless to cure it completely. Even if all the prescriptions were found, it would be useless. There was absolutely no one in the world who could treat this illness. For so many years, Chu Feiyan and Duan Shi had almost abandoned everything for their daughter. Chu Feiyan had tried his best to gather information from the outside, to earn purple crystals, and to collect herbs in places where no one dared to go, or where even martial saints did not dare to go. Even the entire Chu clan had almost emptied all the purple crystals in their storage for Chu Luer's illness. But in the face of the expensive elixirs in the prescription, it was still a drop in the bucket, because that prescription was simply a prescription that would cause one to despair. Other than dozens of spiritual treasures, all the rare elixirs in the heavenly level continent were listed. With such a prescription, not to mention the Chu clan, even one of the dominant clans would go bankrupt. Moreover, it could only prolong one's life, but not cure it completely. So in the end, Chu Feiyan rejected the clan's help and left alone to search for elixirs for his daughter. Until now, he had only found less than 10 elixirs in the hundreds of prescriptions. Although the couple had already made up their mind that even if the elixirs they collected could only prolong their daughter's life by 1 day, they would still put in all their effort. Even if she could only prolong her life by 2 hours, they had to keep her alive for 2 hours. But if the entire Chu clan was implicated and declined, it was a responsibility that the couple could not bear. Now Chu Yang said that it was very difficult to treat. Difficult meant that it could be treated. Duan Shi cried tears of joy. The oil lamp on the table jumped, and a cluster of lights burst out. Chu Yang walked over slowly and closed the door. Turning around, he walked to the table and sat down. He said in a low voice, "There are no outsiders here, so I'll be direct. Third aunt Sister Luer's illness is very troublesome. Currently, I don't have any elixirs with me. This is the first reason. The second reason, Sister Luer's illness can only prolong her life for another 2 years." When this sentence was said, everyone was shocked to the extreme. They couldn't help but believe that Chu Yang really had the ability to cure Chu Luer, because this illness could only prolong her life until she was 13 years old. Only the high priest of the Medicine Valley had said this before. And this sentence was the Chu clan's top secret. Outsiders never knew. But now Chu Yang said it out loud. "What's the third reason?" Duan Shi asked in a trembling voice. "The third reason? There are 2 possibilities. That is to say, while we search for those elixirs in these 2 years, if we can't find them in these 2 years, I'm still confident that I can prolong Sister Luer's life for another 2 years. We'll have more time to search for those elixirs," Chu Yang said. When this sentence was said, Duan Shi's tears flowed down. Prolong her life for another 2 years. That's great, that's great. Suddenly, she covered her face and started to cry. To Duan Shi, her daughter could only live until she was 13 years old. This was a heavy blow, like a curse. Every time she heard the word 13, Duan Shi couldn't help but go crazy. But now, she actually heard that not only was there hope, but that if she couldn't find the elixirs before she was 13 years old, she could prolong her life for another 2 years to wait for the elixirs. To Duan Shi, this was practically music to her ears. However, there was a sorrowful expression on Chu Luer's face. Her delicate little face seemed to have turned black at this moment. She clearly knew what prolong her life for another 2 years meant. This meant that she would have to endure this pain day and night for another 2 years. The little girl bit her lip, her eyes complicated. She had been tortured by her illness for a long time. Her mind was no longer comparable to that of an ordinary 11-year-old girl. She looked at Chu Yang with a conflicted expression, then looked at her mother, who was crying tears of joy. She couldn't help but clench her hands tightly. For mother and father's sake, I'll endure it for another 2 years. So what? Isn't it just pain? I've already endured this pain for 11 years. What's 2 more years? Besides, she really couldn't bear to leave her mother and her home. You said that there are two possibilities. What's the second one? Chu Fian asked hurriedly. The second possibility is, I can treat Sister Lure now, so that she won't feel any pain for 3 months. This means that I can temporarily suppress her illness. I can let her be like a normal child. She won't feel sleepy, cramps or headaches anymore. Chu Yang said solemnly. As everyone listened, they widened their eyes and opened their mouths in shock and ecstasy. But I can only suppress it for 2 years. Chu Yang continued solemnly. And after 2 years, if I can't find all the required elixirs, then I can't do anything about it. This means that I can't prolong her life for another 2 years. Chapter 746. Everyone was stunned. Chu Fian swayed dizzily and sat on the ground. He was dumbfounded and didn't speak for a long time. This is a difficult choice. Chu Yang took a deep breath. So, I don't dare to make the decision myself. I need third aunt to make a decision. Everyone understood that only the child's mother, Duan Shui, could make such a decision. No one else had the right to do so. It was reasonable for Chu Yang to kick him out. There was nothing wrong with that. But everyone was still speechless. If she didn't want to suffer for the next 2 years, she had to give up the chance to extend her life for the next 2 years. If she wanted to extend her life for the next 2 years, it was impossible to reduce the pain for the next 2 years. Duan Shui bit her lips painfully. Her daughter had been in pain for 11 years. How could she let go of this rare opportunity? But, if she chose to live without pain for the next 2 years, what if the elixirs couldn't be found? The elixirs were hard to find. Everyone had personally experienced it these few years. Who was so confident that they could find all the elixirs within 2 years? But if she gave up the next 2 years, what if the elixirs were found soon after the child died? Wouldn't she regret it for the rest of her life? This choice was truly a dilemma. Everyone was silent at the same time. Chu Feiling frowned. Young Rulan's face was solemn. Putting themselves in their shoes, if their child was in such a situation, and they had to make a choice, the couple would not dare to make a decision rashly. This wasn't a choice, it was a dilemma. Chu Fian, who had always been the most enthusiastic, held his breath at this moment. He didn't even dare to cough. Duan Shui's face was full of contradictions and pain. She opened her mouth and closed it again. She didn't know what to do. Chu Luo watched from the side. After a long time, she suddenly plucked up her courage and said, "Big brother, can I choose?" Chu Yang was stunned. He said, "Luo, of course you can choose." Chu Luo pouted and stuck out her little tongue to lick her lips nervously. She turned to look at her mother, her eyes full of longing. She turned back and said resolutely, "Big brother, I want to live for 2 more years. Even if there's no hope, even if it's painful, I want to live to 15 years old." Chu Yang was stunned. Not only Chu Yang, but also Chu Feiling, Yang Rulan and Chu Fian were stunned. Why? Chu Yang asked in surprise. Everyone thought that this girl would definitely choose to live without pain for 2 years. He would never have thought that she would choose to live for 2 more years, endure the extreme pain, and live for another 2 years. I want to accompany my mother and father. Chu Luo lowered her eyelashes and said sadly, "They can't bear to part with me, and I can't bear to part with them either. My parents are too pitiful. Ever since I was able to remember things, I've never seen them smile because of me. Even if it hurts more, I want to accompany them for 2 more years. Big brother, you don't know this. When I'm in pain, my mother hugs me and I don't feel any pain anymore." "Really?" Chu Luo said seriously. "I'm afraid that my mother will be sad and my father will be sad." She paused and turned to look at her mother affectionately. "Even if it's just delaying their sadness by 2 years, it's still good. I'll be very strong. I promise I won't scream when it hurts." "Luo." Duan Shui let out a heart-wrenching cry. Chu Feiling's eyes were wet, and he sighed deeply. Yang Rulan's tears had already flowed down. Chu Fian sniffled and took deep breaths. He kept blinking and not letting his tears fall. He kept muttering, "Good child, good child." Chu Yang also almost shed tears. Everyone knew that the pain that Chu Luo was enduring now was really worse than death. Every day that passed was another day of torture. Every 2 hours that passed was another 2 hours of pain. But this strong little girl resolutely chose to endure this pain, that was 10 times worse than purgatory, for 2 more years, so that her parents wouldn't be sad. Chu Yang's heart began to tremble. No. Duan Shuyi suddenly raised her head with tears all over her face. I want Lu'er to live without pain for 2 more years. Ah! Chu Yang, Yang Ruolin, Chu Feiling and Chu Fian exclaimed at the same time. Duan Shuyi hugged her daughter in her arms. Her voice trembled as she said, ever since Lu'er was born, she has never experienced what it feels like to live without pain. She has never had fun and never been happy. All the things that other children have are very normal. She has been in this world for 11 years, but she has never enjoyed even a little bit of it. Since there's this chance to let her live without pain for 2 years, then I have to satisfy her no matter what. It's good if we can find the medicine in 2 years. If we can't find it, Duan Shuyi's tears streamed down. If we can't find it, I'll let my daughter have 2 years of happiness, in her limited lifespan of 13 years. She grinned miserably. If we can find it, 2 years is about enough. If we can't find it, even if we have 200 years, it will be in vain. That's fate. I only hope that no matter if my daughter is born or not, there will be days when she is free of illness and pain. Even if I can't find the medicine 2 years later, my daughter will still have 2 years of happiness. 2 years of no pain. Everyone was moved. There's actually such a mother and daughter in this world. Mother. Chu Lu'er's tears streamed down. She stuffed her small head into her mother's arms. Her 2 thin and weak arms wrapped tightly around her mother's waist. She started to sob softly. That's good. Chu Yang took a deep breath. He only felt that his eyes were wet and hot. He said, that's right. Third Aunt Lu'er, I only have one request. Duan Shuyi asked, what request? This matter has nothing to do with me. That means no matter who asks, don't say that I did it, Chu Yang said seriously. I understand. Duan Shuyi sized up her nephew who had just arrived. There was understanding in her eyes, but more than that, there was some praise. It seemed that this nephew's intelligence far exceeded that of his peers. He was even more careful in his actions. It seemed that the Chu clan had hope. Since he was so careful in his actions, then he must have some confidence in Lu'er's matter. Fourth uncle, there's only 2 years, Chu Yang said. You have to help me find the medicine. Chu Fian nodded vigorously. Of course. Even if I have to sacrifice my life, I must find the medicine for Lu'er. Why is it only your 4th uncle? Are your mother and I just decorations? Chu Feiling said unhappily. Yes. I misspoke. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. He nodded and bowed, apologizing to the old master first. Then he took out a piece of paper and a brush and wrote on it. After a while he said, these are the 8 medicinal herbs needed to treat Lu'er. Every single one of them had to be found within 2 years. Furthermore, it had to be found within 23 months from now. Give me a month's time to prepare the medicine. Everyone came forward. Then, there was a series of uniform gasps. Absolute Vine, Colored Lotus, Single Flower, Jade Petal, Lingji Life Pangolin S Lifeless Water, Heavenly Jade Elixir, Earthine Soul Ginseng. The 4 adults were stunned. These medicines were for treating Lu'er's illness? If these medicines were gathered together, they could corrode the ground under the Chu clan by 3,000 feet. Have you memorized them? Chu Yang said lightly. Yes, Chu Fian muttered, concentrating on memorizing. Among everyone present, he was the one who knew King of Hell Chu the best. Since King of Hell Chu said that he could treat Lu'er, then he could. If King of Hell Chu said that these medicines were effective, then they were effective. On this point, he had more confidence in Chu Yang than Chu Feiling did. Yes. Chu Yang put this piece of paper on the lamp. The flame rolled out, and the paper started to burn. It slowly burned to ashes. Chu Yang threw it on the ground, and crushed the ashes with his foot. There was no need to say anything else. Chu Yang's action had already explained everything. This prescription must not be leaked out. The medicinal herbs needed must not be known to outsiders, except for the few people present today. Everyone's faces became serious. Lu'er, follow me to the inner chamber. Chu Yang said. Father, mother, wait outside with 4th uncle and 3rd aunt. No matter how long it takes, Don't let anyone disturb us. Yes. The four of them agreed at the same time. Yang. I'm counting on you. Duan Shui looked at Chu Yang with a pleading face. She looked at her daughter with concern. Third aunt, don't worry. When we come out, I promise to return you a healthy daughter. Chu Yang smiled and made a small joke to ease the tense atmosphere. Yes. I believe you. Duan Shui nodded vigorously. Chu Lo kept looking back as Chu Yang pulled her into the inner chamber. Duan Shui looked at the entrance of the inner chamber in a daze. Her hands reached forward, as if she wanted to grab something. She finally sat down and muttered to herself nervously, "Will it work? It will work, right? It will definitely work. Don't worry, it will be fine. It will work." Yang Ruolin grabbed her hand and patted it gently to comfort her. Duan Shui was like a drowning person suddenly grabbing onto a piece of driftwood. She grabbed Yang Ruolin's hand tightly and said with tears in her eyes, "Sister-in-law, I'm counting on you now. I really didn't expect Yang to have learned such earth-shattering skills after being outside for so many years." Yang Ruolan knew that she shouldn't be proud at this moment, but she still felt proud. And she also felt the same way about Duan Shui's misery. So she sighed. Then, she said in a somewhat proud and perturbed manner, "Don't worry. Yang is still young, but she's very steady in her actions. She won't speak without thinking. Since he said he can treat it, he will definitely be able to treat it." Duan Shui nodded repeatedly. Yes. She grabbed Yang Ruolin's hand and didn't let go. "Sister-in-law, this is my last hope. You know what kind of life I've been living all these years. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.